Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Marcus Thorne, and I've been a park ranger for 12 years. Before that, I spent 2 tours in Vietnam tracking enemy soldiers through jungle so thick you couldn't see your own feet. People think being a ranger is about giving directions to tourists and stopping kids from feeding bears. They're wrong. The real job is finding people who don't want to be found or can't be found anymore. In 12 years, I've tracked down 47 missing persons. 47 people who walked into the Olympic National Forest and vanished. Every single one came home alive. That perfect record was something I took pride in. Maybe too much pride. October 1967 was different. The rain had been falling for 3 days straight, turning the forest floor into a soggy mess of pine needles and mud. The ancient trees in this part of Washington are over 1,000 years old. Their trunks so wide, you'd need 6 people holding hands to wrap around them. Moss covers everything like a thick green blanket, muffling sound and making the whole forest feel like the inside of a church, quiet and holy and just a little bit scary. I was supposed to have the weekend off. My ex-wife Sarah had finally agreed to let me see my daughter Katie, and we'd planned to go to the Seattle waterfront. But then the call came in Friday night. 3 hunters hadn't returned from a week-long trip in the Hoh River area. Their wives were worried sick. Jim Kowalski, Pete Rodriguez, and Mike O'Brien, Chief Ranger Williams told me over the crackling radio. All experienced hunters. Know these woods like their own backyards. Should have been back Sunday evening. I canceled my plans with Katie again. Sarah's voice on the phone was cold as winter rain. She's not going to wait forever for you to remember you have a daughter, Marcus. But duty called, and I was good at my job. Better than I was at being a father or husband. Anyway. The storm was getting worse as I loaded my pack Monday morning. Temperature was dropping fast, down to 28 degrees already. In October, that meant the first real snow wasn't far behind. I had maybe 2 days to find these guys before the weather made searching impossible. Joseph Red Cloud was waiting by my truck when I got to the trailhead. He was 67 years old, Kino tribe, and had been guiding people through these woods since before I was born. His weathered face looked troubled. "You sure about this, Marcus?" he asked, shaking his head slowly. "Been hearing things. Bad things." "What kind of things?" "The kind your people don't believe in." He spat into the dirt. "My grandmother used to tell stories about something that walks in the deep forest. Something that ain't supposed to be there." I respected Joseph, but I didn't have time for ghost stories. "Come on, old man. 3 guys are missing. We need to find them before this storm gets worse." Joseph just nodded, but I could see the worry in his dark eyes. "All right, Marcus, but we stay together, and if I say we leave, we leave. No arguments." The Hoh River Trail starts easy enough, winding through second-growth forest where the trees are only 50 or 60 years old. But as you go deeper, the forest changes. The trees get bigger, older, more twisted. The canopy gets thicker until barely any sunlight makes it to the ground. Even in the middle of the day, it feels like twilight. We hiked for 3 hours before finding their camp at mile marker 15. Everything was wrong from the moment we stepped into the clearing. The camp looked like the men had just stepped away for a few minutes. Coffee was still warm in a pot hanging over the fire. Bacon sat half-cooked in a cast-iron pan. 3 sleeping bags were laid out neat and tidy, gear organized the way experienced hunters do things. "Jim." "Pete! Mike!" I called out. My voice echoed strangely in the thick air, like the forest was swallowing the sound. No answer. But that wasn't the strangest part. "Joseph," I said quietly. "You hear that?" He nodded grimly. "I hear it. Or I hear what ain't there." Silence. Complete, total silence. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering, no insects buzzing. Even the wind seemed to have stopped. In 34 years of life, I'd never heard anything like it. The forest felt dead. I started examining the camp with the methodical approach the military had beaten into me. 3 sets of boot prints led away from the fire, heading northeast toward the old-growth section. The tracks were clear in the soft earth, size 11 work boots, all 3 men walking together. But after about 50 yards, something changed. "Marcus," Joseph called from up ahead. "You need to see this." The boot prints continued for another 20 feet, then changed. The deep tread marks became shallower, then turned into bare footprints. Human footprints, but wrong somehow. Too long, too narrow, with claw marks at the tips. "Maybe they took their boots off," I said. But even as I said it, I knew how stupid that sounded. Who takes their boots off in 40-degree weather to walk through muddy forest? The bare prints continued for another 30 yards, then disappeared completely. Not like the men had walked onto hard ground where tracks wouldn't show. They just stopped. Like whatever made them had vanished into thin air. I pulled out my compass to get our bearings. The needle spun wildly, unable to find magnetic north. I tapped it, shook it, held it away from my body. Nothing worked. "Compass broken?" Joseph asked. "Never seen it do this before." I checked my watch, 3:17. But that couldn't be right. We'd started hiking at 9 in the morning, found the camp around noon. It should be at least 2 o'clock. I wound the watch and checked it again. Still 3:17. "We need to keep following the trail," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "These guys are out here somewhere." Joseph grabbed my arm. His grip was strong for an old man. "Marcus, my people have stories about this place. Stories about something that feeds on fear, something that walks between shadows. We should go back." "I'm not leaving without them." We followed the vanished tracks northeast, using broken branches and disturbed moss to guess where the men had gone. The forest got darker and older with every step. Trees that had been growing when Columbus landed in America towered over us like silent giants. That's when we found Jim Kowalski. He was hanging upside down from a massive cedar tree about 10 feet off the ground. At first I thought he'd gotten tangled in some kind of rope or vine while climbing. Then I got closer and saw the claw marks. 4 parallel gashes ran from his throat to his belly, too wide and deep to be from any bear or cougar I'd ever seen. His face was locked in a scream of pure terror, eyes wide and staring at nothing. Worst of all, chunks of flesh were missing from his arms and legs, like something had been feeding on him. I'd seen plenty of death in Vietnam, but this was different. This was personal, intimate, like whatever killed Jim had taken its time, had enjoyed it. "Jesus Christ," I whispered, fighting back the urge to vomit. Joseph was backing away, muttering something in his native language. "We need to leave. Now. We can't just... Look at the ground, Marcus." Around the base of the tree were footprints unlike anything I'd ever seen. 18 inches long, with 5 toes ending in what looked like claws. The stride length was at least 8 feet, meaning whatever made them was huge. But here's the part that made my skin crawl. The prints were fresh. Water was still seeping into the deepest parts, meaning whatever made them had been here within the last hour. Maybe was still here. I unholstered my .38 service revolver and scanned the trees around us. The Adows seemed deeper than they should be, darker, like they were moving independently of the light filtering down through the canopy. "Joseph, we need to..." A branch snapped somewhere behind us. We both spun around but saw nothing except ancient trees and hanging moss. Then we heard it. A low, rumbling sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Not quite a growl, not quite a voice. Something in between that made every instinct I had scream at me to run. "That ain't no bear," Joseph whispered. Something moved in my peripheral vision. I turned quickly, gun raised, but saw only shadows dancing between the trees. Except, the shadows were moving wrong, against the light instead of with it. My radio crackled with static. I grabbed it, desperate for contact with the outside world. Base, this is Ranger Thorne. Do you copy? Nothing but white noise. Base, we have a situation at mile marker 15. 1 fatality, 2 still missing. Request immediate backup. The radio went dead. Not just quiet. Completely dead. Like the batteries had been drained. Joseph was tugging at my sleeve. Marcus, we leave now or we don't leave at all. But I couldn't abandon Pete and Mike. Somewhere out there in this nightmare forest, 2 men were still alive. Still depending on me to bring them home. I'd never left anyone behind in Vietnam, and I wasn't going to start now. We keep looking, I said, but we stay close, and we stay ready. The shadow that wasn't quite a shadow moved again, and this time I was sure it was watching us. We cut Jim down and wrapped him in one of the sleeping bags from camp. I wanted to carry him out, but Joseph convinced me we needed to find the other 2 first. The storm was getting worse, and if we left now, Pete and Mike would be dead by morning anyway. We cache him here, Joseph said, pointing to a hollow beneath a fallen log. Come back for him later. If there was a later. The tracks, or whatever we were calling the impossible prints, led deeper into the old growth section. This was the heart of the Olympic forest, where trees older than Christ himself reached toward a sky we couldn't see. Moss hung from branches like funeral shrouds, and our footsteps echoed strangely in the cathedral silence. My watch had stopped completely at 3:17. Joseph's was doing the same thing. Time seemed broken here, like the normal rules didn't apply. We'd been walking for what felt like hours when we heard the voice. Help me! Please, somebody help me! It was Pete Rodriguez. I was sure of it. The voice came from somewhere ahead and to our left, maybe 200 yards away. Pete! I shouted back. Where are you? I'm hurt. Can't move. Please! I started toward the voice, but Joseph grabbed my arm. His face had gone pale. That ain't Pete, he whispered. What are you talking about? Of course it's... Listen closer. I stopped and really listened. Pete's voice came again, but now I heard what Joseph meant. The words were right, but the tone was wrong. Too flat, like someone reading lines from a script. And underneath it, I could hear something else. A low rumbling that sounded almost like laughter. Help me, I'm bleeding. The voice was closer now, maybe 50 yards. Through the trees, I could see something moving. A dark shape that might have been human, might have been something else entirely. Joseph was backing away slowly, and I followed his lead. Whatever was calling to us, it wasn't Pete Rodriguez. We made it another quarter mile before finding Pete's body. He was sitting against a massive Douglas fir, arms folded peacefully in his lap. From a distance, he looked like he was just resting. But when we got closer, I saw the truth. Pete had been drained. His skin was pale gray, like old paper. His eyes were sunken deep into his skull, staring at nothing. But worst of all, his face was locked in a scream of absolute terror, mouth open wide enough to dislocate his jaw. There wasn't a mark on him, no blood, no wound. It said no sign of violence. But Pete Rodriguez had died in more fear than any human being should ever experience. It feeds on fear, Joseph said quietly. Get stronger from it. That's what the old stories say. I was starting to believe the old stories. A twig snapped behind us. We turned to see a shadow detach itself from a cluster of trees about 30 yards away. At first I thought it was just a trick of the light, a gap between the trunks that looked like a shape. Then it moved. The thing was huge, maybe 9 feet tall and impossibly thin. It moved like liquid shadow, flowing between the trees without making a sound. Where its face should have been, 2 yellow eyes glowed like hot coals. I raised my gun and fired 3 shots center mass. The bullets passed right through it like it was made of smoke. The shadow thing turned those burning eyes on me and made a sound like wind through a graveyard. Then it was gone, melted back into the darkness between the trees. We need to move, Joseph said. It's playing with us now, but that won't last long. We found Mike O'Brien 20 minutes later, and he was still alive. He was sitting in a circle of stones, rocking back and forth and muttering to himself. His rifle lay beside him, empty shells scattered around his feet. When he saw us, he didn't show any relief or recognition. He just kept rocking and muttering. "Mike," I said gently, "it's Marcus Thorne. We're here to take you home." Mike looked up at me with eyes that had seen too much. "It comes at night," he whispered. "When the shadows get long, it whispers things, tells you secrets about yourself that nobody should know." "Mike, we need to get out of here. Can you walk?" "I shot at it," he continued, not really hearing me. "Must have put 20 rounds into that thing. Bullets just went right through. Then it laughed at me. God help me, it laughed." Joseph was scanning the trees around us. "Marcus, we need to go, now." The sun was setting, and the shadows were getting longer, much longer, and some of them were moving wrong again, twisting and reaching toward us like grasping fingers. I tried to lift Mike to his feet, but he fought me. "No! If we move, it'll see us. It sees everything that moves in the dark." That's when I heard it laughing. The sound came from everywhere at once, echoing off the massive tree trunks and rolling through the forest like thunder. It was the sound of something ancient and hungry and absolutely without mercy. Through the gathering darkness, shapes began to move. Not one shadow thing, but many. They flowed between the trees like smoke, surrounding us in a circle that grew tighter with each passing moment. "The old ways," Joseph said suddenly. He pulled a leather pouch from his jacket and began sprinkling something that looked like cornmeal in a circle around us. "My grandmother's medicine. Might buy us some time." The shadow things stopped at the edge of the circle, as if hitting an invisible wall. They circled us like wolves, those burning yellow eyes watching, waiting. "It won't hold them long," Joseph said. "When full dark comes, we're dead." Mike O'Brien looked up at me with eyes like broken glass. It told me things about my wife, things she did while I was away hunting, things that were true. The shadows pressed closer. The temperature was dropping fast, and our breath came out in white puffs. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold my gun. One of the shadow things stepped forward, and for the first time, I got a clear look at it. It was vaguely human-shaped, but wrong in every detail. Too tall, too thin, with arms that hung down past its knees. Its fingers ended in claws, like broken glass. But worst of all was its face, or what should have been its face. Instead, there was just smooth shadow, with those two burning eyes floating in the darkness. When it spoke, the voice was Pete Rodriguez's voice, perfect in every detail. "Why did you leave your daughter alone again, Marcus? She's only 8 years old. She cries herself to sleep wondering why Daddy doesn't love her anymore." The words hit me like physical blows. How could it know about Katie? How could it know about the guilt that ate at me every day? "Don't listen," Joseph warned. "That's how it feeds. On guilt, on fear, on shame." But I was listening. I couldn't help it. "Your wife found another man," the thing continued in Pete's stolen voice. "Someone who comes home at night. Someone who reads bedtime stories and helps with homework. Katie calls him Daddy now." Rage and terror warred in my chest. The shadow thing grew larger, more solid, feeding on my emotions like a leech. "That's enough!" I screamed, and charged forward with my useless gun. The thing reached out with one impossible arm and backhanded me across the clearing. I hit a tree trunk hard enough to see stars, and when I looked up, it was standing over me. "Fear makes me strong," it said, this time in my own voice. "And you taste like 34 years of running from yourself." Its claws pierced my shoulder, and ice-cold fire shot through my body. I could feel my life, my memories, my very essence being drawn out through those terrible wounds. In the distance, I heard Joseph chanting something in Kino and Mike O'Brien screaming. Then everything went black. I woke up trapped inside the hollow trunk of a dead cedar tree, bigger around than my living room back home. My shoulder was on fire, and I could feel blood soaking through my shirt. Outside, I could hear that thing moving around, sometimes speaking in Pete's voice, sometimes in Jim's, sometimes in my own. "Marcus, you can't hide in there forever," it said, using my ex-wife's voice now. "Come out and face what you really are." a coward who runs away when things get hard. Through a gap in the rotted wood, I could see Joseph Red Cloud standing in the clearing. He was chanting something, holding a burning sage bundle, while Mike O'Brien cowered behind him. The shadow thing circled them like a shark, growing larger and more solid with each pass. "The old med I seen won't work much longer," it taunted in Joseph's own voice. "And when it fails, I'll drain the old man first. Let you watch his fear feed me until I'm strong enough to crack this world like an egg." I had to do something. Joseph was risking his life trying to protect us, and Mike was already half crazy with terror. If I stayed hidden, we were all dead. But every time I thought about moving, the creature's words echoed in my head. Everything it had said about Katie, about Sarah, about my failures as a husband and father, it was all true. I was a coward who ran away from the hard parts of life, who chose the wilderness over responsibility, who left an 8-year-old girl crying herself to sleep. The shame and guilt crashed over me like a black wave, and outside I heard the shadow thing laugh with pleasure. "Yes," it hissed. "Feed me that beautiful self-hatred. Let me taste your delicious despair." That's when I understood. In Vietnam, I'd learned that fear was just another enemy. You couldn't let it control you, couldn't let it make your decisions. You acknowledged it, used it to stay sharp, but you never let it rule you. This thing fed on fear, on guilt, on all the negative emotions that ate at people from the inside. The more afraid I was, the stronger it became. The more I hated myself, the more solid and dangerous it grew. But what if I stopped being afraid? I thought about Katie, about the way her face lit up when I told her stories about tracking in the woods. I thought about Sarah, about the good times before the war changed me. I thought about Jim and Pete, who deserved better than to die in terror in this cursed place. And slowly, carefully, I pushed the fear down. It wasn't easy. The creature's words had cut deep, opening wounds that had been festering for years. But underneath the guilt and shame, I found something else. Anger. Pure, clean anger at this Tiamaj. Hing that fed on human suffering, that had murdered 2 good men and broken Mike O'Brien's mind. I pulled out my hunting knife, 6 inches of carbon steel that had served me well in Vietnam. In the dark hollow of the tree, I could hear the shadow thing's voice changing, becoming less certain. "Where is it?" the creature snarled. "Where is your beautiful fear?" I stepped out of the hollow trunk. The shadow thing was smaller now, less solid. Without my terror feeding it, it was losing substance. But it was still dangerous, still deadly. "You want to know what I'm afraid of?" I said, walking toward it with the knife held ready. "I'm afraid of failing people who count on me. I'm afraid of letting good men die because I was too much of a coward to fight." The creature backed away, yellow eyes flickering like candles in the wind. "But I'm not afraid of you anymore. You're just a parasite, a leech that feeds on human weakness. And I've been weak long enough." I lunged forward with the knife. This time, instead of passing through shadow, the blade bit deep into something solid. The creature screamed, not with a human voice, but with a sound like tearing metal. Black blood poured from the wound, steaming where it hit the ground. The shadow thing stumbled backward, clutching at the gash in its chest. "Impossible," it hissed. "Fear makes me strong. Fear makes me real." "Then starve," I said, and drove the knife home again. The creature let out one final scream that shattered the supernatural silence of the forest. Birds began singing again, insects buzzed, and somewhere in the distance, I heard a wolf howl. The shadow thing collapsed into itself like smoke being sucked down a drain. In seconds, there was nothing left but a patch of burned earth and the smell of sulfur. Joseph Red Cloud was staring at me with something like awe. "How did you know?" "Fear feeds it," I said, pulling Mike O'Brien to his feet. So I stopped being afraid. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't that simple. In the depths of the forest, shadows still moved wrong. Yellow eyes still watched Faz, roam the darkness between ancient trees. I'd hurt the thing, maybe even killed it. But the forest remembered what had been here. and something told me it would remember for a very long time. It took us 15 hours to hike out with Mike O'Brien. He couldn't walk on his own. Whatever he'd seen in those woods had broken something inside his mind that might never heal. Joseph and I took turns carrying him, moving as fast as we dared through the storm that had turned the trail into a river of mud. We never went back for Jim Kowalski's body. When the search and rescue team went in a week later, they found nothing. No body, no blood, no trace that 3 men had ever been in those woods. The official report blamed a bear attack, though no one could explain where the bodies had gone. Chief Ranger Williams filed my incident report in a locked cabinet and told me to never mention what really happened. People wouldn't understand, he said, and they wouldn't believe it anyway. He was probably right. Who would believe that something ancient and hungry stalked the deep woods, feeding on human fear like a vampire feeds on blood? Mike O'Brien spent 6 months in a psychiatric hospital. When he got out, he moved to Phoenix and never set foot in a forest again. He still sends me Christmas cards, but we never talk about what happened. We don't need to. We both see the shadows differently now. Joseph Red Cloud died of a heart attack 2 years later. At his funeral, his grandson told me that Joseph had spent his last months researching old tribal stories, trying to find ways to keep the shadow thing locked in the deep forest where it belonged. He said it wasn't dead, the grandson told me. Just sleeping, waiting for someone else to feed it. As for me, I still work as a park ranger, still track missing persons through the Olympic wilderness. But I avoid the old growth sections now, usually around mile marker 15. And I teach other rangers to recognize the signs, the unnatural silence, the shadows that move wrong, the sudden failure of equipment. Most of them think I'm paranoid, maybe suffering from delayed stress from Vietnam. They don't understand that some predators hunt with claws and teeth, while others hunt with whispers and fears. I never did see Katie that weekend. By the time I got out of the woods, she'd given up waiting and gone back to her mother. But I started making more time after that, started showing up when I said I would. Life's too short to let fear of commitment keep you away from the people you love. Because I learned something in those dark woods that no amount of military training could have taught me. The worst monsters aren't the ones that tear you apart with claws. They're the ones that feed on your guilt, your shame, your regret, all the ways you tear yourself apart from the inside. And sometimes, late at night when I'm alone in my cabin, I look out at the tree line and see shadows that don't quite match the moonlight. I remember yellow eyes watching from the darkness, and a voice that knew all my secrets. The shadow walker is still out there, somewhere in the deep forest, waiting for the next person who wanders too far from the light, carrying too much fear and guilt to fight back. But now I know its weakness. Fear feeds it, shame makes it strong. But courage, real courage, can send it back to whatever hell it crawled out of. I just hope the next person who meets it in the dark remembers that lesson. Some nights, when the wind blows through the ancient trees, I think I can hear it calling my name. And I'm not afraid anymore. Final word count, approximately 4,200 words. My name is Daniel Ashworth, and I've been a park ranger for 16 years. I've pulled more than 200 people out of these Minnesota woods, most of them in winter when the cold turns deadly fast. I'm telling you this story because I need someone to know what really happened out there in February 1981, even if you don't believe me. I live in a small cabin near the Boundary Waters with my twin daughters, Emily and Jessica. They're 16 now, smart as whips, and the only family I got left since my wife Sarah died 3 years back. Every morning before I head out to work, I kiss them goodbye and promise I'll come home safe. That promise got a lot harder to keep after what I saw at Knife Lake. The call came in around noon on February 12th. Bob Morrison had rented an ice fishing cabin with his family for the week, him, his wife Linda, and their 2 kids, Tommy and Susan. The cabin was about 30 miles north of town, way out in the deep woods where cell phones don't work and the nearest neighbor is miles away. Bob was supposed to check in every day by radio, but he'd missed 2 calls. The temperature was sitting at 20 below zero, and the weather service was calling for a blizzard that night. 3 feet of snow already covered the ground, and with only 6 hours of daylight in February, time was running short. I loaded my snowmobile with emergency supplies and headed out alone. Standard rescue stuff. I'd done it hundreds of times before. The ride out to Knife Lake took me through some of the thickest forest in Minnesota. Pine trees so tall they blocked out most of the sky, and snow so deep it muffled every sound. I'd been through these woods since I was a kid, knew every trail and frozen lake like the back of my hand. But something felt different that day. The animals were too quiet. No bird calls, no squirrel chatter, not even the distant howl of a wolf. Just the sound of my snowmobile engine cutting through the silence. I found the Morrisons' cabin just as the sun was starting to set. What I saw there still gives me nightmares. The front door was hanging off its hinges and the windows were all broken from the inside. Glass and wood pieces were scattered everywhere in the snow. Dark stains covered the white ground around the cabin, stains that looked an awful lot like blood. I called out for the Morrison family but got no answer except my own echo bouncing off the trees. I pulled out my radio and tried to call for backup, but all I got was static. The radio worked fine when I tested it that morning, but now it was dead as a doornail. I checked my flashlight. Dead too, even though I'd put in fresh batteries. Something about this place was wrong, like the air itself was sick. The smart thing would have been to head back to town and get help. But a ranger's job is to help people, and somewhere out there was a family with 2 young kids. I couldn't just leave them. So I tied a rope around my waist, anchored it to my snowmobile, and stepped inside that broken cabin. The smell hit me first. It was like a slaughterhouse mixed with something rotten and wild. The inside of the cabin looked like a tornado had gone through it. Furniture was scattered everywhere. Some pieces gnawed and chewed like a giant dog had been playing with them. Long scratches ran down the walls, too deep and too wide to be made by any animal I knew. And there was blood. Lots of it. I found Bob Morrison's wallet on the floor next to the overturned kitchen table. His fishing license was still inside, along with a picture of his family. In the photo, they all looked happy and normal. Just a regular family on vacation. Now they were missing, and something terrible had happened in this cabin. That's when I heard it for the first time, a sound like wind through the trees, but shaped into words. It was calling my name over and over, in a voice that sounded exactly like my dead wife, Sarah. Daniel, Daniel, help me. I ran outside so fast I nearly tripped over my own feet. The voice followed me, echoing through the forest, getting fainter, but never quite stopping. I stood there in the snow, shaking and trying to convince myself it was just the wind. But deep down, I knew something was hunting in these woods, something that knew my name. I should have left right then, should have gotten on my snowmobile and raced back to town, brought an army of rangers and police and anyone else who would listen. But that voice that sounded like Sarah kept calling, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the Morrison family was still out there somewhere, still alive, still needing help. I spent the next hour searching around the cabin with my backup flashlight. The beam kept getting dimmer even though the batteries were new, like something was draining the power right out of them. I followed a trail of broken branches and disturbed snow that led away from the cabin and into the deep woods. Whatever had made this trail was big, real big. The tracks were the strangest thing I'd ever seen. They looked almost human, but stretched out wrong. Each footprint was nearly 2 feet long, and the stride between them was close to 15 feet. No human could walk like that. No animal either, at least none that I knew of. The prints were deep in the snow, like whatever made them weighed a lot more than it should. I followed the trail for maybe a quarter mile before I found Linda Morrison. She was hanging from a pine tree about 10 feet off the ground, her body twisted at angles that didn't make sense. Her winter coat was torn to shreds, and there were bite marks on her arms and legs. Big bite marks, like from something with teeth the size of my fingers. But the worst part was her face, or what should have been her face. It was gone. Just gone, like something had peeled it right off. I threw up in the snow. Couldn't help it. In 16 years of ranger work, I'd seen plenty of bear attacks and hunting accidents, but nothing like this. Bears don't hang their prey in trees. Bears don't eat faces. And bears sure don't make tracks like the ones I'd been following. I was still staring at Linda Morrison's body when I heard something moving in the woods behind me. Something big, crashing through the underbrush like it didn't care about being quiet. I spun around and caught a glimpse of something pale and thin moving between the trees. It was there for maybe 2 seconds before it disappeared. But those 2 seconds were enough. The thing was tall, taller than any person had a right to be. Its arms hung down past its knees, and its fingers ended in claws that looked like they could tear through steel. Its skin was white as snow, but covered in dark stains that I didn't want to think about. And its face... God, its face was all wrong. Too long, too thin, with yellow teeth that stuck out like broken glass. I ran. I'm not proud of it, but I ran like the devil himself was chasing me. Behind me, I could hear that thing moving through the woods, keeping pace with me, easy as you please. Every time I looked back, I caught another glimpse of it flashing between the trees. It was playing with me, I realized, like a cat playing with a mouse. I made it back to the cabin and barricaded myself inside, used whatever furniture was left to block the door and windows. Then I sat in the corner with my service pistol drawn, waiting for whatever was out there to try and get in. The waiting was almost worse than the running. Every little sound made me jump, the wind in the trees, the cabin settling, my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. That's when I heard Bob Morrison calling for help. His voice was coming from somewhere deeper in the woods, weak and scared. "Help me. Please, somebody help me. It's got my kids." He sounded hurt, desperate. Everything in me wanted to go to him, to help him like I'd helped so many others over the years. But I also remembered that thing in the woods, and how it had sounded exactly like Sarah when it called my name. I stayed in the cabin. Bob's cries for help went on for maybe an hour, getting weaker and more desperate. Sometimes he'd scream, high and awful, like something was hurting him real bad. Other times he'd just whimper, calling for his wife and kids. I sat there listening to it all, hating myself for not going to help, but too scared to move. Around midnight, the sounds stopped. The woods went quiet again, that same sick silence I'd noticed on the ride in. I waited another hour, then crept to the window and looked out. The snow was falling harder now, and the wind was picking up. The blizzard was starting early. That's when I saw Bob Morrison walking toward the cabin. He looked terrible. His clothes were torn and bloody, and he was limping bad on his right leg. His face was white as paper, and his eyes had a wild look that I'd seen before in people who'd been lost in the woods too long. He was calling my name, begging me to let him in. "Daniel, Daniel, I know you're in there. Please, you got to help me. It killed Linda. It killed my babies." He was sobbing, pounding on the door with his fists. "Please, I'm so cold. I'm so hungry. Just let me in." I wanted to help him. Every instinct I had as a ranger and as a human being told me to open that door and pull him inside. But something held me back. Maybe it was the way he kept talking about being hungry, or the way his voice sounded just a little bit off, like someone doing an impression of Bob Morrison instead of Bob Morrison himself. I stayed quiet and watched him through the window. He kept pounding on the door, calling my name, begging to be let in. But as the minutes passed, his voice started to change. It got deeper, rougher, like something was wrong with his throat. And when he looked up at the window, I saw his eyes weren't right. They were too big, too bright, like they were glowing in the dark. "Daniel," he said, and now his voice sounded like Sarah's again. "Daniel, why won't you help me? I'm so cold out here. I'm so hungry. Just let me in, and I'll stop being hungry." I backed away from the window, my heart hammering in my chest. Outside, the thing that looked like Bob Morrison started to laugh. It was a sound like breaking glass mixed with a wolf's howl, and it went on and on until I thought I might go crazy from listening to it. Then it was gone, and I was alone in the cabin with the storm building outside and the knowledge that something was hunting in these woods. Something that could look like people, sound like people, but wasn't people at all. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Linda Morrison hanging from that tree, or that thing with Bob Morrison's face laughing outside the window. By morning, the storm had gotten worse. Snow was coming down so hard I couldn't see 10 feet in any direction, and the wind was howling like a living thing. My radio was still dead, and now my snowmobile wouldn't start. The engine would turn over, but it wouldn't catch, like something had drained all the power out of it. I was stuck in that cabin with whatever was hunting in the woods, and no way to call for help. Around noon, I heard another snowmobile engine in the distance. At first I thought it might be backup coming to look for me, but then I remembered the storm. No sane person would be out in this weather. The engine got closer, and I heard it stop outside the cabin. "Daniel, you in there?" The voice belonged to Paul Ironwood, another ranger who worked the northern section. Paul was Ojibwe, about 55 years old, and knew these woods better than anyone. He'd been my partner on a lot of rescues over the years, and I trusted him more than just about anyone. I moved the furniture away from the door and let him in. Paul was oaked like he'd been through hell. His face was scratched up and his winter gear was torn in several places. He was breathing hard like he'd been running. "Thank God you're alive," he said, looking around at the wrecked cabin. "I've been tracking that thing for 2 days." "What thing?" I asked, though I had a pretty good idea. Paul sat down heavily in one of the remaining chairs. "My grandfather would have called it a Wendigo. A creature that was once human but got so hungry it started eating people. Once you taste human flesh, you can't stop. You change, become something else. Something that's always hungry, always hunting." I wanted to laugh, to tell him he was talking crazy. But I'd seen what I'd seen, and heard what I'd heard. "Come on, Paul. You don't really believe that stuff." "I didn't used to," he said. "But 3 days ago I found a hunting camp about 5 miles from here. 4 men, all dead, all partially eaten. The tracks around the camp were just like the ones here, too big, too long, wrong shape for any animal. And there was something else. One of the hunters was missing, but his truck was still there. His wallet, his gun, everything. Like he just vanished." Paul pulled out a thermos of coffee and poured me a cup. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold it. "The Morrison family," I said. "I found Linda hanging from a tree. Bob and the kids are still missing." "Bob Morrison isn't missing," Paul said quietly. "Bob Morrison is dead. What you saw last night, that wasn't Bob. That was the Wendigo, using his shape to try and get close to you. It's smart, Daniel. Smarter than any animal. It knows how to hunt people, how to get them to trust it." I told him about the thing calling my name in Sarah's voice, about how it had sounded like Bob Morrison begging to be let in. Paul listened without interrupting, his face getting darker with each detail. "It's getting stronger," he said when I finished. "Every person it kills, every piece of human flesh it eats, it gets bigger and stronger and smarter. We need to find it before it finds us." "Find it?" "Paul, we need to get out of here. Get back to town and bring help." Paul shook his head. "Look outside, Daniel. This storm's going to last for days. My snowmobile died about a mile from here. Same as yours, I'm guessing. We're stuck, and it knows we're here. Our only chance is to kill it before it kills us." I was about to argue when we heard a sound from outside. A child's voice, high and scared, calling for help. "Daddy! Daddy, where are you? I'm scared!" It was Tommy Morrison, Bob's 12-year-old son. Paul and I looked at each other, and I could see the same question in his eyes that was in mine. Was it really Tommy, or was it the Wendigo again? "Daddy, please help me, it's so cold." The voice was getting closer, and now I could hear footsteps in the snow outside the cabin. Small footsteps, like a child would make. I started toward the door, but Paul grabbed my arm. "Don't," he said. "Listen to the voice. Really, listen." I stopped and focused on the sound. The voice was Tommy's, but something was wrong with it. It was too clear, too perfect, like someone reading lines from a script. And underneath the words, I could hear something else. A low, rumbling sound, like an animal growling. "Daddy, I found Susan. She's hurt real bad. You gotta come help her." That almost got me. The thought of that little 8-year-old girl hurt and scared in the woods was more than I could stand. I took another step toward the door. "Daniel, no," Paul hissed. "It's not Tommy. Tommy's dead." As if it had hurt him, the voice outside changed. It got deeper, more raspy, and started to laugh. Not like a child laughing, like something pretending to be a child and not doing a very good job of it. The laughter went on and on, echoing through the storm. Then we heard the real Tommy Morrison. He was screaming somewhere out in the woods, screaming in pain and terror, calling Fa, or his daddy, begging for help. The sound was coming from the opposite direction of the fake Tommy, and it was getting fainter, like he was being dragged away. "We have to help him," I said, reaching for my gun. "It's too late," Paul said sadly. "That thing's got him. If we go out there, we'll just be giving it 2 more victims." Tommy's screams went on for maybe 10 minutes, then stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was worse than the screaming. Paul and I sat in that cabin, listening to the wind and knowing that somewhere out there, a 12-year-old boy had just died horribly. "How do we kill it?" I asked. Paul reached into his pack and pulled out a flare gun. "Fire," he said. "It's the only thing that works. My grandfather told me stories about the old days, when Wendigos would come to the villages in winter. The only way to stop them was to burn them." We spent the rest of the day preparing. Paul had brought supplies, more flares, some gasoline, matches. We soaked rags in gas and tied them to the ends of broken chair legs, making torches. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. As darkness fell, we heard it moving around outside. Big, heavy footsteps circling the cabin, testing the walls and windows. Sometimes it would scratch at the door with those long claws, making sounds like nails on a chalkboard. Other times it would just stand outside and breathe, loud, raspy breathing that sounded like it was right next to our ears. Around midnight, it started talking again. This time it used Sarah's voice, then my daughter's voices, then Paul's dead wife. It knew exactly what to say to hurt us most, promising to stop hurting people if we'd just come outside, promising to let us go if we'd just let it in. We didn't listen. We sat in that cabin with our makeshift weapons, waiting for it to make its move. And around 3 a.m, it did. The thing came through the roof. The ceiling exploded inward with a sound like thunder. Wood and nails and chunks of insulation rained down on us as something huge dropped into the cabin. I got a clear look at it for the first time, and I wished I hadn't. It was maybe 12 feet tall, thin as a skeleton, but strong as a bear. Its skin was pale white, stretched tight over bones that stuck out at weird angles. Its arms hung down to its knees, ending in hands with fingers like black knives. But the worst part was its face, or what should have been its face. It looked like someone had taken a human face and stretched it like taffy, making the mouth too wide and the eyes too big. When it opened its mouth, I saw rows of yellow teeth, each one sharp as a razor. "Hello, Daniel," it said, and its voice was a mixture of every person I'd ever cared about. "I've been so hungry, so very hungry." Paul moved first, raising the flare gun and firing. The flare hit the Wendigo in the chest, and for a moment it was outlined in red fire. The thing screamed, a sound like breaking glass mixed with a wild animal's roar, and stumbled backward. The smell of burning flesh filled the cabin. But it didn't die. It just got angry. The Wendigo lashed out with one of those long arms, catching Paul across the chest with its claws. Paul flew backward into the wall, blood spreading across his shirt. He hit the ground hard and didn't get up. I lit one of our gasoline torches and swung it at the creature. It danced backward, staying just out of reach, but I could see fear in those 2 big eyes. The fire was hurting it, even if it wasn't enough to kill it. "You can't run forever, Daniel," it said, circling me like a cat playing with a mouse. "I can smell your fear. I can smell your hunger. You're just like me, you know. We're both hunters. We both know what it's like to be hungry. I'm nothing like you," I said. But even as I said it, I felt something cold in my stomach. I was hungry. I hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, and the smell of Paul's blood was making my mouth water. That wasn't right. That wasn't human. The Wendigo laughed like it could read my thoughts. "Oh, but you are. You've been hungry for a long time, haven't you? Hungry for your wife to come back. Hungry for your old life before everything went wrong. And now you're hungry for something else. Something warm and red and satisfying." It was right, and that scared me more than anything else. I could feel something changing inside me, something dark and awful waking up. The torch in my hand felt heavy, and for a moment I thought about dropping it. It would be so easy to just give in, to let the hunger take over. Then I thought about Emily and Jessica, my 16-year-old daughters waiting for me at home. They'd already lost their mother. They couldn't lose their father, too. I swung the torch again, and this time I caught the Wendigo across the face. It shrieked and stumbled backward, clawing at its burning skin. I pressed my advantage, driving it toward the door with flames and shouting, "Get out! Get out of here!" The Wendigo retreated, but it wasn't running. It was planning something. I could see it in those glowing eyes, the way it moved like a wolf circling its prey. It was just looking for an opening. That's when Paul spoke up from the floor. "Daniel," he said weakly, "the gasoline. Pour it on the floor." I grabbed the gas can and splashed it around the cabin, keeping the torch between me and the Wendigo. The creature watched me with growing alarm, and I realized it knew what I was planning. "You'll kill yourself too," it said, and for the first time, it sounded worried. "Is that what you want? To die here, in this cabin, while your daughters wait for you to come home?" I thought about Emily and Jessica, about how they'd feel if I never came back. But I also thought about Tommy Morrison screaming in the woods, about Susan Morrison still missing, about all the people this thing would kill if I let it go. "Maybe," I said, "but at least I'll take you with me." I dropped the torch. The cabin went up like a bomb. Fire raced across the floor and up the walls, turning the whole place into an inferno in seconds. The Wendigo screamed and tried to run, but the flames were everywhere. I saw it burning, its pale skin turning black and peeling away. And I felt something like satisfaction. Then the smoke got too thick, and I couldn't see anything. I stumbled toward where I thought the door was, coughing and choking. The heat was incredible, like being inside an oven. I could feel my hair starting to singe, and my clothes were getting hot. I found the door and burst outside into the snow. The cold air hit me like a slap, and I rolled around in the snow to put out the places where I was starting to burn. Behind me, the cabin was completely engulfed, flames shooting up into the night sky. I looked for the Wendigo, but I couldn't see it anywhere. Maybe it had burned up in the fire. Maybe it had escaped. I was too hurt and too tired to care. Paul stumbled out of the cabin a few seconds later, his clothes smoking but alive. We sat in the snow and watched the place burn down, neither of us saying anything. The storm was starting to clear, and I could see stars between the clouds. "Is it over?" I asked. Paul shook his head. "I don't know. Maybe. But Wendigos are hard to kill. Fire might not be enough." As if to prove his point, we heard something moving in the woods. Something big. Something hurt, but still alive. The Wendigo had survived the fire, but it was wounded now. We could hear it crashing through the trees, getting farther away. "It's leaving," Paul said, "looking for somewhere to heal up." I thought about all the other families who might be camping or hunting in these woods, all the people who might cross paths with a wounded, angry Wendigo. We have to warn people. "How?" Paul asked. "Who's going to believe us?" He was right. If we told anyone what really happened, they'd think we were crazy. But we couldn't just let that thing roam free either. The sound of the Wendigo moving through the woods faded away, leaving us alone with the burning cabin and the knowledge that something evil was still out there, somewhere in the darkness. The rescue team found us 2 days later when the storm finally cleared. Paul and I were half frozen and barely conscious, huddled together in the remains of the cabin. We told them about the Morrison family, how we'd found Linda's body, how Bob and the kids had been killed by a bear, a really big bear. They believed us, mostly. Bears don't usually attack in winter, but strange things happen in the woods sometimes. They found Linda Morrison's body where I'd left it, and after a week of searching, they found what was left of Bob and Tommy. The official report said they'd been mauled by a large predator, probably a bear driven out of hibernation by hunger. They never found Susan Morrison. She was listed as missing, presumed dead. But I knew better. I knew she was still out there somewhere, changed by what she'd experienced, changed by what she'd been forced to eat to survive. I went back to work after a month of medical leave. Burns heal, broken bones mend. but some things never get better. I started reading everything I could find about Wendigos, about the old stories and legends. I learned that they spread like a disease. Anyone who ate human flesh, even if they were forced to, risked becoming one themselves. I also learned that they were smart. Smart enough to hide, to wait, to plan. Smart enough to look human when they needed to. Over the next few years, I kept track of strange incidents in the northern woods, hunting parties that went missing, families who never came back from camping trips, bodies found torn apart in ways that didn't match any known animal attacks. Most people blamed wolves or bears, but I knew better. It was still out there, still hunting, still hungry. I retired from the Forest Service last year. My daughters are grown now, living their own lives in cities far from these woods. They think I'm getting paranoid in my old age, obsessed with story. Yes, that don't make sense. Maybe they're right. But I still live in the same cabin, still keep my guns loaded and my doors locked. Because sometimes on cold winter nights when the wind is howling through the trees, I hear something moving in the woods behind my house. Something big, something that knows my name. And sometimes when I'm alone and the hunger gets bad, because it does get bad, especially in winter when food is scarce, I remember what it felt like to smell Paul's blood in that burning cabin. I remember how my mouth watered, how good it seemed like it would taste. The Wendigo is right about one thing. We are all hungry, all the time. Most of us just don't realize it yet. But I do. And that's why I keep the guns loaded. That's why I never go into the woods alone anymore. And that's why if you ever find yourself camping in the northern Minnesota woods in winter, and you hear someone calling your name in the voice of someone you love, someone who shouldn't be there, don't answer. Don't look. And whatever you do, don't let them in. The hunger is always waiting, and it's always watching. My name is Robert Kellerman, and I've been a forest ranger for 14 years. I know these woods better than most people know their own backyards. Every tree, every trail, every animal that calls this place home. Or, at least, I thought I did. It was late September 1974 when everything changed. The leaves were just starting to turn, painting the Chequamegon National Forest in reds and golds. Hunting season was about to start, and I was doing my usual rounds in Sector 7, the most remote part of my territory. 25 miles from the nearest road, where the limestone caves run deep and the valleys hide secrets older than memory. I'm 38, never married, and I've spent most of my adult life studying wildlife. Got my PhD in biology before I took this job. My specialty is predator behavior. Wolves, bears, big cats. I can tell you what animal passed by just from looking at its tracks. I can read scat like a book and predict pack movements better than most computers. That morning, something felt wrong the moment I stepped out of my truck at the trailhead. The forest was too quiet. No bird songs, no squirrel chatter, none of the usual sounds that make these woods feel alive. Even the insects seemed to have vanished. In all my years out here, I'd never experienced silence like that. I checked my radio. Static. That wasn't unusual this deep in the forest, but it added to the strange feeling crawling up my spine. I grabbed my pack and started walking toward the coordinates I'd been given. A hunting party had missed their check-in time. 6 experienced hunters who knew these woods almost as well as I did. The trail wound through thick undergrowth and rocky outcrops. Limestone formations jutted up like ancient bones, creating natural amphitheaters where sound carried in weird ways. The Menominee people who lived here first had stories about these places, stories I'd all about, ways filed away as folklore. As I walked deeper into Sector 7, I noticed something else strange. No animal tracks. None at all. The soft earth near the creek should have been covered with deer prints, rabbit trails, maybe some wolf or bear sign. Instead, the ground looked swept clean, like every living thing had just picked up and left. I found their campsite around noon. 6 tents arranged in a neat circle around a cold fire pit. Everything looked normal at first glance. Too normal. No scattered gear, no signs of a hasty departure, just 6 empty tents with sleeping bags still rolled out inside. Then I saw the trees. Claw marks scored the bark about 7 feet up on the pines surrounding the camp. Deep gouges that went right through to the heartwood. I'd seen bear scratches before, but these were different. Too high, too precise. And there were too many of them, like a whole pack of something had been sharpening its claws. I took pictures with my department camera, but when I advanced the film, it made a grinding sound. I opened the back. The entire roll had been exposed to light somehow, even though I'd loaded it fresh that morning. The silence pressed in around me as I documented the scene. No insects buzzing, no wind in the trees, just the sound of my own breathing and the scratch of my pen on paper. I'd been in dangerous situations before, cornered bears, aggressive wolves, but I'd never felt anything like this. It was like the forest itself was holding its breath. I found the first body just as the sun started to sink behind the tree line. Frank Weber lay about 50 yards from camp, near a cluster of limestone boulders. I'd known Frank for years. He was a regular in these woods, a careful hunter who never took unnecessary risks. What was left of him told a story that made no sense. The body had been partially eaten, but not by any animal I recognized. The bite patterns were wrong, too large and too organized. Whatever had killed Frank had taken specific parts with surgical precision. Most disturbing were the defensive wounds on his hands and arms, deep gouges that matched the claw marks on the trees. I called it in on my radio, but got nothing but static and strange sounds that almost sounded like voices. My hands shook as I tried different frequencies. In 14 years of ranger work, I'd never felt so completely cut off from the outside world. While I waited for backup that might never come, I started following the trail. The tracks told an impossible story. Paw prints the size of dinner plates, but with what looked like human toe marks. The stride was too long for any known animal, and the prints seemed to shift from four-legged to two-legged gait. More disturbing was how the tracks moved. They showed coordination that spoke of intelligence. One set would circle around while others approached from different angles. This wasn't random predator behavior. This was tactical thinking. The sun was setting fast, and I knew I should head back to my truck. But Frank Weber had 4 friends still missing, and somewhere in these woods, whatever had killed him might be hunting again. I found Dale Schmidt's body just before dark. He was hanging upside down from a tree branch, drained of blood like a deer ready for butchering. But no deer I'd ever seen had been hung with rope. No animal used tools like that. I cut him down with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. Dale's body showed the same precise bite patterns as Frank's, but there was something else. His bones looked wrong, elongated somehow, like something had been stretching them. His fingernails had grown into what looked almost like claws, and his jaw seemed too long for his face. As I knelt beside Dale's body, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Voices calling from the darkness. Human voices, crying for help. "Bob, over here! Help us!" It was Carl Hoffman's voice, I was sure of it. But something about it didn't sound right. The tone was perfect, but the timing was off, like an echo that came before the original sound. "Carl," I called back, grabbing my flashlight. "Where are you?" "By the caves." The voice came from 3 different directions at once. "Hurry!" I started toward the sound, then stopped. In all my years studying predator behavior, I'd learned to trust my instincts, and every instinct I had was screaming at me to run. Instead, I climbed the nearest tree with a good view of the area. What I saw down there in the moonlight changed everything I thought I knew about the natural world. 5 shapes moved through the forest below me. At first glance, they looked like wolves, large ones the size of small horses. But they walked upright sometimes, switching between 2 legs and 4 like it was the most natural thing in the world. Their movements were coordinated, purposeful. One would signal to another with a gesture that looked disturbingly human. They were hunting me. I stayed in that tree until dawn, watching them patrol the area below. Sometimes they would call out in perfect human voices. Carl, Rick, Joe, Mike. All the missing hunters. But their mouths never moved when the sounds came out. When the sun finally rose, they melted back into the deep forest like shadows. I climbed down on legs that barely held me and stumbled back toward my truck, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. That's when I met Tom Riverside. Tom was waiting by my truck when I got back to the trailhead. He was a veteran ranger from the neighboring district, 49 years old, with gray in his beard and eyes that had seen too much. The Park Service had sent him when I missed my check-in. "You look like hell, Kellerman," he said, offering me coffee from his thermos. "What happened out there?" I told him everything, expecting him to recommend I get psychiatric evaluation. Instead, he nodded grimly and pulled out a folder. "Add this," he said. The folder contained incident reports going back to the 1800s. Hunters found dead in the same area, always during hunting season. Bodies partially eaten, arranged in ways that suggested intelligence. Local Menominee tribal records spoke of beast men who could take human form, cursed bloodlines that passed the transformation from generation to generation. "There's more," Tom said. "I talked to Joseph Crowfeather on my way here. He's a tribal elder, knows the old stories. He says the pack is growing." We drove back to the Forest Service station to resupply and plan our next move. I called my supervisor, but the phone lines to town were down. The radio was still nothing but static, and those disturbing voices that sounded almost human. Tom had brought different equipment, cameras with special film, recording devices, even some items that seemed more like folklore than forestry. "Silver bullets," he explained when he saw me staring, just in case the old stories were true. We went back into Sector 7 that afternoon, following the trail deeper into the limestone cave system. The tracks were easier to follow now. The creatures weren't trying to hide anymore. If anything, they seemed to be leading us somewhere. We found Rick Novak's body near the entrance to the main cave. Like the others, he'd been partially eaten, but there was something different about Rick. His body showed signs of change, the same bone elongation I'd seen in Dale, but more advanced. His face was stretched, wolf-like, and his hands had become something between human and animal. "Jesus," Tom whispered. He was turning. Inside the cave, we found evidence of habitation. Bones arranged in ritualistic patterns, sleeping areas that could accommodate either human or wolf forms, and scratched into the limestone walls were symbols that looked almost like writing. That's when we heard them coming. The howling started low and distant, but it wasn't like any wolf song I'd ever heard. It was too organized, too purposeful, and underneath the howls were other sounds, human voices calling our names, pleading for help. "Tom," came a voice from the cave entrance. "Bob, come help us. We're hurt." It was Joe Peterson's voice, but Joe was standing right next to me, or something wearing Joe's voice was. We moved deeper into the cave system, following passages that seemed to go on forever. Our flashlight beams picked up more claw marks on the walls, more ritualistic bone arrangements, and everywhere the sense that we were being watched. The attack came without warning. Something dropped from the cave ceiling, landing between Tom and me. In the flashlight beam, I saw it clearly for the first time. 7 feet tall when it reared up on its hind legs, covered in dark fur but with human-like hands ending in claws. Its face was a nightmare fusion of wolf and man, with intelligent eyes that held malevolent purpose. Tom fired 3 shots center mass. The bullets hit. I saw the impacts, but the creature barely flinched. It swept Tom aside with one massive paw, sending him crashing into the cave wall. I ran. Behind me, I could hear Tom screaming, then the sounds of something feeding. I stumbled through the cave passages, guided only by instinct and terror. The howling followed me, echoing off limestone walls until I couldn't tell which direction it was coming from. I found another exit and burst out into daylight, gasping and sobbing. When I looked back, 5 pairs of glowing eyes watched me from the cave mouth. They could have followed me, could have run me down easily, but they didn't. They wanted me to spread the word. They wanted people to know they were here. I made it back to the truck and drove straight to the ranger station. But when I got there, Tom Riverside was already waiting for me. He looked pale and shaky, with bandages wrapped around his left arm, but he was alive. "How did you get here so fast?" I asked. He looked at me with eyes that weren't white the same color as before. "Fast?" That's when I noticed the bite marks on his bandaged arm. deep puncture wounds that were already showing signs of infection, if infection was the right word for whatever was spreading through his system. "Tom, we need to get you to a hospital." "No hospitals," he said, and his voice carried a growl that hadn't been there before. "Need to finish this first." Over the next 2 hours, I watched my partner transform. Not all at once, but in stages that were somehow worse than any sudden change would have been. His fingernails darkened and grew longer. His teeth began to shift, becoming more pointed. Most disturbing was the way he kept sniffing the air, like he was tracking scents I couldn't detect. "I can hear them," he said around sunset. "They're calling to me." "Tom, fight it. Whatever's happening to you, you can fight it." He laughed, but it came out more like a bark. "You don't understand, Bob. I don't want to fight it. It feels right, like coming home." The transformation accelerated as darkness fell. Tom's body stretched and changed, bones cracking as they reformed. His face elongated into something between human and wolf. But his eyes stayed intelligent, aware. That was the most horrible part. "Kill me," he whispered, through a mouth that was no longer entirely human, "before I become one of them completely. Please." I couldn't do it. 14 years of friendship, of shared dangers in the wilderness, and I couldn't pull the trigger. Instead, I watched as Tom Riverside disappeared into something else entirely. The pack came for him at midnight. They surrounded the ranger station, 5 massive shapes moving with coordinated precision. The Tom thing responded to their calls, howling in a voice that was almost human. When they left, he went with them. I was alone again, but not for long. They came back an hour later, and this time they weren't being subtle. The pack surrounded the building, testing doors and windows with intelligence that was purely human. One of them, the largest, probably the Alawas, Thaw, reared up on its hind legs and looked directly at me through the window. Its eyes were Tom's eyes. "Join us, Bob," it said in Tom's voice. "Join the hunt." I had 2 choices, run or fight. Running meant leading them back to populated areas where innocent people would die. Fighting meant facing 5 supernatural predators with nothing but standard ranger equipment and a handful of silver bullets Tom had brought. I chose to fight. The battle was brief and brutal. They came through the windows all at once, moving faster than anything that size should be able to move. I got off 4 shots, hitting 2 of them, before they were on me. The silver bullets worked. The wounded creatures retreated, howling in pain and rage. But the others kept coming. Claws raked across my chest, fangs snapped inches from my throat. I fought with everything I had, using my knowledge of wolf pack dynamics against them. The key was the alpha. Take out the leader, and the pack would scatter. But the alpha was Tom. And even transformed, he was still my friend. In the end, mercy was what saved me. Instead of going for the kill shot, I aimed for his leg, trying to wound rather than destroy. The silver bullet shattered his femur, and he went down howling. The rest of the pack immediately moved to protect him, dragging him away into the forest. But before they left, Tom looked back at me one last time. For just a moment, his eyes were human again. "Thank you," he whispered. I filed my official report 3 days later, after search and rescue teams had recovered what was left of the hunting party. The official cause of death was listed as rogue wolf pack attack. The bodies were relocated to different areas to support the cover story. Nobody questioned my version of events. After all, who would believe the truth? Tom Riverside was listed as missing, presumed dead. His body was never found, because there was no body to find, just something that wore his face and spoke with his voice, running wild in the deep forest with its new pack. I requested a transfer to a different district, but they denied it. Someone needed to monitor Sector 7, they said, someone who understood the situation. So I stayed and I watched and I learned. The pack is still out there. Every hunting season, they add new members. Not everyone who goes missing dies. Some join them, becoming part of something ancient and hungry. The bite spreads the curse, but only to those with the right bloodline. The Menominee elders knew which families carried the old blood, but that knowledge died with them. I've documented 17 disappearances over the past year. Officially, they're listed as hunting accidents, bear attacks, getting lost in the wilderness. But I know better. I've seen the tracks, studied the bite patterns, followed the territorial markers they leave scratched into trees. Sometimes, on moonless nights when the wind is right, I can hear them calling to me. Tom's voice mixed with the others, promising companionship, promising an end to the loneliness that's been eating at me since that September night. The worst part isn't the fear anymore. It's the temptation. Last week, I found myself standing at the edge of their territory with a silver bullet loaded in my gun. Not to hunt them, but to use on myself before the change could take hold. Because I've started having dreams. Dreams of running through the forest on 4 legs, of hunting under the full moon, of being part of something larger than human understanding. I wake up some mornings with dirt under my fingernails and blood on my clothes, and I can't remember how it got there. The pack is patient. They know I'll come to them eventually, one way or another. And the terrible truth is, part of me wants to. My name is Robert Kellerman, and I've been a forest ranger for 15 years now. I know these woods better than anyone alive, but I'm not sure how much longer I'll stay human enough to care. My name is Catherine Holloway, and I've been a forest ranger for 19 years. I'm telling you this story because I need someone to know what really happened in the Mount St. Helens recovery zone back in October 1988. The official report says it was an equipment malfunction. That's a lie. I was 43 then, divorced for 5 years, raising 2 teenagers on my own. Sarah was 16 and always rolling her eyes at me. Mark was 14 and thought he knew everything. They needed me to come home every night, and I needed this job to keep food on the table. Mount St. Helens had blown up 8 years before in 1980. The whole north side of the mountain just gone. Trees flattened for miles like giant matchsticks. My job was helping bring the forest back to life. We planted thousands of tiny Douglas fir and pine seedlings where the old giants used to stand. I believed in science back then. I thought if you understood how something worked, you could control it. Trees grew because of sunlight and water and good soil. Animals followed patterns you could predict. Everything had a reason, a system you could figure out. The recovery zone was a strange place to work. Even 8 years later, you could still see the ash layers in the dirt. Dead tree trunks stuck up like broken bones. The streams ran different colors sometimes, gray from the ash, red from the iron. But life was coming back. Green shoots pushed through the ash. Birds started nesting again. It felt like we were healing something broken. I drove out there every morning in my green Forest Service truck, past the signs warning visitors to stay on marked trails. The radio crackled with check-ins from other rangers scattered across the district. We all knew each other's voices. It was like a big family spread out over thousands of acres. The weather was changing that October. Rain came early and stayed late. Fog reserve, old and thick most mornings, making the stumps look like ghosts. The sun set earlier each day and the shadows grew longer. Something about the light felt different, flatter, colder. The forest was getting ready for winter. I had a crew of 3 doing reforestation work that month. Dave Martinez was our crew leader, 35 years old, married with a baby on the way. He knew trees better than anyone. Ken Thompson was the muscle, 28, could carry 50-pound tree boxes like they were nothing. Lisa Chang was our newest hire, fresh out of college, full of ideas about forest management. They were good people, hard workers, the kind who showed up early and stayed late because they believed in what we were doing. Dave always brought extra coffee to share. Ken told terrible jokes that made us all groan. Lisa took notes on everything, asking questions that made the rest of us think harder about our work. On October 12th, I sent them to Sector 7 to plant seedlings along the old logging road. It was routine work. Dig holes, plant trees, water them in, move on to the next spot. They had enough supplies for 2 days. The weather looked decent. Nothing unusual. I should have gone with them. They were supposed to radio in every 4 hours. By 6 that evening, I hadn't heard anything since their morning check-in. The radio just gave me static when I tried to call. I wasn't worried yet. Radio dead zones were common in the recovery area. The eruption had knocked down most of the communication towers, and we were still rebuilding the network. But something felt wrong. Dave was careful about procedures. He never missed a check-in without a good reason. I drove out to Sector 7 the next morning. The fog was thick, so thick I had to use my headlights even though it was past 8 o'clock. The road was muddy from the rain, and my truck slipped and slid going up the hills. When I reached their work site, I found their equipment, but no sign of my crew. The chainsaws were there, still attached to their harnesses, shovels stuck upright in the dirt. The water tank they used for the seedlings was full. Their lunch coolers sat unopened on the tailgate of Ken's pickup truck. But the weird thing was where some of the equipment ended up. Dave's chainsaw was hanging 15 feet up in a dead snag, the chain wrapped around the trunk like someone had thrown it there. 2 shovels were driven deep into the bark of a living tree, so deep I couldn't pull them out. Ken's work gloves were nailed to a stump with railroad spikes. I called out their names. My voice echoed strange in the fog, like the forest was swallowing the sound. No answer. Not even an echo coming back. The seedlings they'd been planting were wrong too. We'd given them 200 baby Douglas firs to plant in neat rows along the old road. Instead, I found them arranged in a perfect circle about 50 feet across. Someone had worked all night to move them because they were planted properly. Good holes, roots spread right, watered in. But the pattern didn't make sense. Inside the circle, the ground was torn up like something big had been digging. Clods of dirt and ash were scattered everywhere. In the center was a hole about 6 feet across and maybe 3 feet deep. The sides were smooth, like it had been carved rather than dug. That's when I noticed the silence. No birds, no insects, no wind in the trees. Even the constant drip of water from the fog had stopped. The forest was holding its breath. I walked around the circle of seedlings, looking for tracks or any sign of where my crew had gone. The footprints were confusing. Dave's boot prints led from the truck to the circle, then stopped. Ken's tracks went around the circle 3 times, then also stopped. Lisa's smaller prints were everywhere, like she'd been running. But there were other tracks too. Long grooves in the dirt that looked like someone had dragged heavy rope across the ground. Except rope doesn't. It leaves splinter marks in rocks. I tried my radio again. Nothing but static. Tried my cell phone. No signal. The fog was getting thicker instead of burning off like it should have. I could barely see my truck even though I'd parked it just 50 yards away. That's when I heard Dave's voice. "Catherine? Catherine, help me. I'm stuck." It came from somewhere in the fog, but I couldn't tell which direction. I called back but got no answer. Just that awful silence again. I followed the sound, or tried to. The fog played tricks with direction. I'd walk toward where I thought the voice came from, but it always seemed to be moving away. My boots squelched in the mud and branches grabbed at my jacket. "Dave, where are you?" "Here, I'm here. I can't move." This time the voice was definitely coming from my left. I pushed through a stand of young trees and found him. Dave was pressed against a Douglas fir, his arms spread wide like he was hugging it. At first I thought he was just resting, maybe hurt. But when I got closer, I saw the truth. The tree was growing around him. Bark had grown over his hands and wrists. His jacket was disappearing under layers of wood. The tree trunk was wider than it should be, swollen where Dave's body was being absorbed. "Catherine," he said, and his voice was calm, too calm. "I can't move. It happened so fast. The tree just reached out." "That's impossible," I said, because it was. Trees don't grow that fast. Trees don't reach out and grab people. "Hold on. I'll get you out." I pulled out my knife and started cutting at the bark around his hands. The wood was soft, almost wet, and it bled sap that looked too much like blood. Dave didn't seem to feel the cuts. "It doesn't hurt," he said. That's the strange part. I can feel myself becoming part of it. The roots, the leaves, the sunlight on the branches. It's beautiful, Catherine. I can feel the whole forest. "Stop talking crazy," I said, cutting faster. But the bark was growing back as fast as I could cut it away. We need to get you to a hospital. The others are here too, Dave said. Ken and Lisa. They're part of the forest now. We're all connected. I looked around frantically. The fog was so thick I could barely see 3 feet in any direction. But I could hear them now. Voices calling my name from the trees around me. Catherine. That was Ken's voice coming from somewhere to my right. Help us, Lisa called from behind me. But when I looked, I only saw trees. Regular trees, standing where they'd always been. Except now they seemed to be watching me. Dave's face was starting to disappear under the bark. Just his eyes and mouth were still visible, and they were peaceful, almost happy. Run, he whispered. Don't let it take you too. Tell Sarah and Mark that their mom fought to come home. The fog around me started to move, swirling in patterns that looked almost like reaching arms. I heard footsteps in the mud, but couldn't see who was making them. I ran. I made it back to my truck, but barely. The fog followed me like it was alive, reaching out with tendrils that felt cold against my skin. My hands shook so bad I could hardly get the key in the ignition. The engine turned over, but the headlights wouldn't work. The radio was dead too, not even static now. I drove by feel, following the ruts in the road, praying I wouldn't drive off a cliff in the fog. Halfway back to the ranger station, the fog suddenly lifted. One moment I couldn't see the hood of my truck. The next moment the sun was shining and the forest looked normal again. I pulled over and threw up in the ditch. Dave's calm voice kept echoing in my head. I can feel the whole forest. People don't talk like that when they're dying. People scream and fight and beg for help. They don't sound peaceful while a tree is eating them alive. Back at the station, I called the sheriff's office and requested a search and rescue team. I told them 3 forestry workers were missing, L.A., as seen in Sector 7. I didn't mention the tree. Who would believe that? Sheriff Tom Bradley arrived with 4 deputies and a search dog. Tom was a good man, steady and smart. We'd worked together on lost hikers before. He took one look at my face and poured me a cup of coffee. You look like you've seen a ghost, Catherine. What happened out there? I told him about finding the equipment scattered around, the seedlings planted in a circle, the hole in the ground. I didn't mention Dave fused with the tree. I told him I'd heard voices calling for help, but couldn't find anyone in the fog. Fog can play tricks on your mind, Tom said. Sound bounces around strange. Could have been anyone calling. The search team went out that afternoon. I stayed behind to coordinate communications and search the personnel files for next of kin information. Dave's wife was 8 months pregnant. Ken's parents lived in Oregon. Lisa's family was back in California. The searchers came back at sunset with grim faces. They'd found the work site exactly as I'd described it. The circle of seedlings, the scattered equipment, the hole in the ground. But no sign of the missing workers. Strangest thing, Deputy Mike Santos told me. That hole in the ground? It's filled with roots, thick ones like tree roots, but they're fresh, still growing, and the whole area smells like Christmas trees, that sharp pine smell, but so strong it made us dizzy. Did you find any tracks leading away from the site? That's the other weird thing. Plenty of tracks in the circle, but they all just stop, like the 3 of them just vanished into thin air. Tom decided to expand the search the next morning. He called in volunteers from the community and borrowed a helicopter from the state patrol. If my crew was lost in the forest, they'd find them. I went home to Sarah and Mark that night, but I couldn't sleep. Very time I closed my eyes, I saw Dave's face disappearing under the bark. I heard his voice saying, I can feel the whole forest. Around midnight, I gave up trying to sleep and went out to sit on the porch. The stars were bright and the air was cold and clean. Normal. Real. That's when I heard the tapping. It was coming from the big oak tree in my front yard. Tap, tap, tap. Like someone knocking on wood from the inside. I told myself it was just a woodpecker, but woodpeckers don't work at night. The tapping had a rhythm to it, almost like Morse code. 3 short taps, 3 long ones, 3 short ones again. SOS. I grabbed a flashlight and walked over to the tree. The tapping stopped as soon as I got close. I shined the light up and down the trunk, looking for holes or any sign of what might be making the sound. Nothing. just normal bark and normal branches. But when I started to walk away, the tapping started again. This time from the maple tree by the driveway, then from the apple tree behind the house, then from the pine trees along the property line, all of them tapping out SOS. I ran back inside and locked the door. The tapping continued all night, moving from tree to tree around the house. I sat in the kitchen with a baseball bat, watching the windows, waiting for... what? For the trees to come walking up to the house? By morning, the tapping had stopped. I made coffee and tried to convince myself it had been a dream. But when I looked out the front window, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The oak tree in my front yard was bigger than it had been the day before. Not by much, maybe 6 inches wider around the trunk. But I'd lived in this house for 10 years. I knew that tree, and it was definitely bigger. The search teams went out again, but they found nothing. No trace of Dave, Ken, or Lisa. The official report would say they'd probably fallen into an old lava tube or mine shaft. The forest was full of hidden dangers. People went missing in the wilderness all the time. That afternoon, I drove back to Sector 7 alone. I had to see. Dave again, had to try to get him out of that tree. But when I got to the work site, the Douglas fir was gone, not cut down. Gone. The stump was still there, but it was old and weathered, like it had been cut years ago. There was no sign that anything had ever grown around a human body. The circle of seedlings was gone too. In their place was a grove of young trees that looked like they'd been growing there for years. The hole in the ground was filled with rich, dark soil. I walked around the area for an hour, looking for anything that proved what I'd seen the day before, but the forest had erased all evidence. It was like my crew had never existed, except for the voices. As the sun started to set, I heard them again, Dave calling my name from the trees, Ken laughing at one of his terrible jokes, Lisa asking questions about forest management. Their voices were coming from every direction now, echoing through the woods. And they weren't calling for help anymore. They were calling for me to join them. "Catherine," Dave said, his voice coming from a tree right behind me. "It's wonderful here. No more worry about bills or loneliness or getting old, just peace and the feeling of growing toward the light." I turned around but saw only trees. Regular trees that had probably been standing there for decades. "We're all connected now," Ken's voice said from my left. "We can feel every raindrop, every bird's nest, every root reaching deeper into the earth." "Don't you want to be part of something bigger?" Lisa asked. "Something that will last forever?" The voices were getting closer, and the trees around me were starting to move. Not much, just a swaying of branches when there was no wind, a rustling of leaves that sounded almost like whispers. I backed toward my truck, but the forest path kept shifting. Trees that had been on my right were suddenly on my left. The trail I'd followed in was nowhere to be found. "There's no need to be afraid," Dave said, and his voice was coming from directly above me now. "We're still your friends. We're still your crew. We just want you to be part of the team." I looked up and saw faces in the bark of the trees. Subtle at first, just patterns in the wood that looked like eyes and mouths. But as I stared, they became clearer. Dave's kind face in the trunk of a cedar, Ken's grin in the bark of a pine, Lisa's questioning eyes in the smooth skin of a birch. They were all watching me, all of them waiting. The trees started to close in. I ran blindly through the forest, crashing through underbrush, tripping over roots, not caring about the branches that tore at my clothes. The voices of my crew followed me, always just behind, always getting closer. My flashlight beam showed trees moving out of my way and then closing the path behind me. Roots rose up from the ground to trip me. Branches reached down to tangle in my hair. The forest was alive and hunting me. I burst into a clearing and almost ran straight into another person. A woman in her 50s, with long gray hair and weathered hands. She wore a Forest Service uniform like mine, but older, more worn. "You're Catherine Holloway," she said. It wasn't a question. "Who are you? How do you know my name?" "I'm Maria Cloudfeather, Yakima Tribal Liaison. And you need to stop running and start listening, or you're going to end up like your crew." The voices in the trees grew louder, more insistent. I could hear Dave calling my name, Ken laughing, Lisa asking me to join them. But Maria held up her hand, and the voices stopped. "You have some kind of control over this thing?" I asked. "Not control. Understanding. There's a difference." She sat down on a fallen log and motioned for me to sit beside her. "My grandmother told me stories about the forest spirit, the guardian. She said it was old when the first humans walked these mountains." "This is about folklore? My crew is dead because of some old stories?" "Your crew isn't dead, that's the problem. You're still alive, still conscious, but they're part of the forest now. The guardian absorbs people, but it keeps their minds intact. They become part of something bigger." A chill ran down my spine. "That's impossible." "Is it? You've seen it yourself. You've heard them talking to you. Does it sound like they're suffering?" I thought about Dave's peaceful voice, the way he'd said he could feel the whole forest. No, they seemed happy. The guardian isn't evil. It's trying to restore balance. The volcano erupted 8 years ago and destroyed thousands of acres of forest. Now humans are replanting, but we're doing it wrong. We're not asking permission. We're not respecting the old agreements. What agreements? The ones my ancestors made with the forest spirits. The ones that kept the balance for thousands of years. The ones your people forgot when they decided they could own the forest instead of being part of it. The trees around us were swaying now, even though there was no wind. I could feel them listening, waiting. "So, what does it want?" "A caretaker. Someone who understands both worlds, the human world and the forest world. Someone who can make sure the replanting is done right, with respect for what was here before." "And if I say no?" Maria pointed to the trees around us. "Then you join your crew. You become part of the Guardian's consciousness. You'll be happy, but you'll never see your children again." Sarah and Mark. I thought of them at home, probably doing homework, complaining about their lives, taking for granted that I'd always be there to come home to them. If I say yes, what happens? You become the Guardian's partner. You help guide the reforestation efforts. You make sure humans and the forest can coexist. But you'll be changed. You'll be able to feel what the forest feels, hear what it hears. You'll never be fully human again. The voices of my crew started up again, calling my name. But this time they sounded different. Urgent. Warning. "The Guardian is losing patience," Maria said. "It's been waiting for you to understand. If you don't choose soon, it will choose for you." The trees around the clearing started to move closer. Not swaying now, but actually walking, their root systems tearing up from the ground like giant feet. The sound was like thunder and breaking glass. I could see the Guardian now, rising up from the center of the forest. It was massive, hundreds of feet tall, made of twisted trunks and branches and roots. Human faces were visible in its bark. Not just my crew, but dozens of others. People who had been absorbed over the years, their consciousness woven into the forest's mind. Dave's face appeared in the Guardian's chest about 20 feet above the ground. His voice boomed out, impossibly loud, but still gentle. "Catherine, you have to choose. We can't hold it back much longer. It wants you to join us, but we know you have children to raise. We know you can't leave them. So what do I do? Make the deal Maria told you about. Become the bridge between worlds. It's the only way to save yourself and protect the forest." The Guardian's massive hand reached down toward me. Each finger was the size of a tree trunk, and I could see smaller faces embedded in the bark. Men and women and children who had been absorbed over the centuries. "I'll do it," I said. "I'll be your partner. But I need to be able to go home to my kids. I need to live in both worlds." The Guardian's hand stopped just inches from my face. I could feel its breath, which smelled like pine needles and rich earth and something else, something ancient and wild. "The bargain is acceptable," the Guardian said, and its voice was like wind through trees. "But there will be a price. One of your crew must remain as a permanent reminder of what happens to those who disturb the forest without permission." I looked up at Dave's face in the Guardian's chest. He nodded sadly. "Lisa," he said, "she's young. She'll have the most time to learn, to understand. Ken and I can be released, but Lisa stays." "No," I said. "I can't choose who lives and who dies." "You're not choosing," Maria said quietly. "They are. They're choosing to sacrifice one to save two. That's the price of the bargain." Lisa's voice came from somewhere in the Guardian's massive form. "It's okay, Catherine. I understand. I can feel what it's like to be part of something this big, this important. I can handle it." The Guardian's hand touched my forehead, and suddenly I could feel everything. Every tree in the forest, every root system, every bird's nest and deer trail and stream. The forest was alive in ways I'd never imagined, and I was part of it now. But I was still me. Still Catherine Holloway, mother of two, forest ranger, human being. The Guardian had kept its bargain. Dave and Ken stepped out of the trees around the clearing, solid and real and human again. They looked dazed, but alive. Lisa remained part of the Guardian, but she smiled at me from the bark of a massive cedar. "Take care of them," she said, "and take care of the forest. I'll be watching." The official report blamed the incident on equipment failure and disorientation in heavy fog. Dave and Ken were found 2 days later, suffering from exposure and memory loss. They remembered going to work in Sector 7, but nothing after that until they woke up in the forest. I drove them to the hospital myself. They were physically fine, but changed. Dave quit his job and became a park naturalist. Ken started a tree planting business and never used power tools again. They remembered nothing about being absorbed by the Guardian, but they both developed an almost religious respect for the forest. I kept my job as a ranger, but my approach to forest management changed completely. I started consulting with tribal elders about traditional forest practices. I learned about the old agreements, the ways humans had worked with the forest instead of trying to control it. The reforestation efforts in the Mount St. Helens recovery zone became a model for the whole country. We planted trees in natural patterns instead of rigid rows. We used native species that had grown there for thousands of years. We asked permission before we disturbed the soil, and I could feel the Guardian's approval. Every morning when I drove into the forest, I felt its presence welcoming me. Every tree we planted with respect grew strong and healthy. Every stream we helped restore ran clear and clean. But the changes in me were harder to hide. I started knowing things I shouldn't know: when storms were coming, where to find lost hikers, which trees were diseased before they showed symptoms. My connection to the forest grew stronger every year. Sarah and Mark noticed the changes too. I was more patient with them, more understanding. I seemed to know when they were lying or hiding something. They joked that I had eyes in the back of my head, but it was more than that. I could feel their emotions the way I could feel the forest's moods. They're adults now, with children of their own. Sometimes I take my grandchildren to visit the forest, and I show them how to walk quietly, how to listen to what the trees are telling them. They're too young to understand the full truth, but they're learning respect. Lisa is still there, still part of the Guardian. Sometimes when I'm alone in the forest, I can hear her voice in the wind through the trees. She's happy, she tells me. She's learned things about the forest that no human has ever known. She's become something more than human. But she's also the Guardian's warning to others. Researchers who come to study the recovery zone with too much arrogance, loggers who try to cut trees without permission, developers who want to build roads through pristine forest. They all meet Lisa first. She appears to them as a young woman stepping out from behind a tree, and she explains the rules. Most of them listen. A few don't. The Guardian is patient, but it's not infinitely forgiving. I'm 68 years old now, and I've been the Guardian's partner for 27 years. I've helped replant thousands of acres of forest, trained dozens of rangers in respectful forest management, and kept the peace between the human world and the forest world. But I'm getting old, and the Guardian needs someone younger to take over, someone who understands both worlds, who can speak for the forest when humans forget their place. I've been training my replacement for 3 years now. Her name is Jennifer Chen, and she's everything I was at her age. Smart, dedicated, convinced that science can solve every problem. She doesn't believe in forest spirits or ancient agreements. Yet. But she's starting to listen to the trees. She's starting to understand that the forest is more than just a collection of plants and animals. She's starting to feel the connections that bind all living things together. Soon, she'll be ready to make her own choice. And when she does, I hope she chooses wisely. Because the guardian is still there, still watching, still waiting. The forest remembers everything, and it never forgets the price of disrespect. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear the tapping from the trees around my house. Not SOS anymore. Now it's a different message, tapped out in the ancient rhythm of the forest's heartbeat. Welcome home, it says. Welcome home. My name is James Whitmore, and I've been a park ranger for 11 years. I tell people that because what I'm about to share sounds crazy, and I need you to know I'm not some weekend camper making stuff up. I know these mountains, I know these caves, and I know what I saw down there. It was June 1979, hot and sticky like only Tennessee summers can be. Susan was 6 months pregnant with our first baby, due in August. She kept telling me to be extra careful on cave rescues, like somehow becoming a dad would make me forget how to do my job. But I didn't mind. Having something to come home to made every day feel more important. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. 4 scientists from the university had gone missing in the Cataract Falls cave system. Dr. Patricia Wells, the team leader, Brad Foster, a geology student, Amy Chen, who studied underground water systems, and Steve Kowalski, their photographer. They'd been mapping the deeper chambers for 2 days and should have come out Monday evening. Their car's still in the parking lot, Sheriff Davidson told me over the radio. Equipment's there, but no sign of them. I knew that cave system better than my own backyard. I'd mapped most of it myself over the years, led dozens of tours through the main chambers. It was stable, well-marked, and had good airflow. Not the kind of place people just disappear. Eddie Thornfield met me at the cave entrance. We'd worked together for 3 years, and I trusted him with my life. He was younger than me, maybe 28, with the kind of careful nature that kept people alive underground. His wife had just had their second kid, so he understood why I was being extra cautious these days. Found their base camp about 200 feet in, Eddie said, checking his headlamp. Coffee's still warm. That should have been our first warning. Coffee doesn't stay warm for 24 hours in a cave where the temperature never gets above 55 degrees. We geared up with our standard rescue kit, ropes, first aid supplies, emergency blankets, extra lights. The cave mouth looked normal, just a dark opening in the limestone cliff surrounded by thick mountain laurel and the sound of falling water. But something felt different. The air coming out of the cave was wrong somehow. Not bad, just wrong. You notice anything weird about the sound? I asked Eddie as we started down the main passage. He stopped and listened. The cave had its own voice, dripping water, small echoes, the distant sound of the underground river. But today it sounded muffled, like someone had put a blanket over everything. Maybe it's the humidity, Eddie said. Been raining a lot lately. The main passage sloped down at a gentle angle for about 300 feet before opening into Cathedral Chamber, a room so big our lights couldn't reach the far walls. The scientists' base camp was set up right in the center, just like Eddie had said. Sleeping bags laid out neat, cooking gear arranged on a flat rock, notebooks stacked in a pile, and the coffee pot was still warm. This doesn't make sense, I said, touching the metal pot. It was definitely warm, like it had been taken off a flame maybe an hour ago. When did you say they were supposed to come out? Yesterday evening, maybe 6 o'clock. I looked at my watch. It was 10 in the morning. That coffee pot should have been stone cold. We started following their trail deeper into the cave. The footprints were clear in the soft mud. 4 sets of boots, all different sizes, heading toward the passage that led to the lower galleries. But as we followed them, something started bothering me. The prints were too clear, too perfect. In 11 years of cave rescue, I'd never seen tracks that sharp after more than a day. Cave mud stays damp, but it doesn't hold perfect boot prints for 36 hours. Eddie, I said, kneeling down to look closer, look at these tracks. He crouched beside me, running his light over the prints. We both saw it at the same time. There weren't just 4 sets of tracks. There were 8. 4 sets going in and 4 sets coming back out. But the sets coming back out were identical to the ones going in. Same boot size, same stride length, same depth, like the exact same people had walked the exact same way twice. Maybe they came back for something, Eddie said, but his voice sounded uncertain. All 4 of them, walking in the exact same footsteps? We kept following the trail, but the feeling that something was seriously wrong kept growing in my gut. The cave felt too quiet. Our lights seemed dimmer than usual. And twice I thought I heard footsteps behind us, but when we turned around, there was nothing there. The passage to the lower galleries was a narrow squeeze between 2 limestone walls. We had to go single file, and our gear scraped against the rock. It was the kind of place where you definitely didn't want to get stuck. On the other side, the cave opened up into a series of smaller chambers connected by low tunnels. This was where the scientists had been doing their real work, measuring water flow, taking rock samples, photographing the formations. Their equipment was scattered around like they'd just stepped away for a minute, but they'd been gone for almost 2 days. "James," Eddie called from the next chamber over, "you need to see this." I squeezed through the connecting tunnel and found him standing over Dr. Wells' notebook. It was open to her most recent entry, dated 2 days ago. The handwriting was neat and scientific, describing water temperature and mineral deposits. But the last line made my blood run cold. "Something's wrong with the echoes. They don't sound like us anymore." I read that line 3 times before it really hit me. Dr. Wells was a professional scientist, not the kind of person to write something like that unless she read. Ally meant it. "What do you think she meant?" Eddie asked. I had no idea, but I was starting to get the feeling we were about to find out. We kept following the trail deeper into the lower galleries. The chambers got smaller and the air got thicker. Our lights started acting funny, flickering for no reason, casting shadows that seemed to move on their own. I'd been using the same headlamp for 2 years, and it had never given me trouble before. "Battery's getting low," Eddie said, tapping his light. "Mine too. But I just put fresh ones in this morning." We both knew that made no sense. Good batteries should last at least 8 hours underground, and we'd only been down for maybe 2. The trail led us to a chamber I'd never seen before. That should have been impossible. I'd mapped this whole section myself, drawn every passage and room. But here was a chamber about the size of a small house, with smooth walls that seemed to curve in ways that hurt to look at. And standing in the middle of it was Amy Chen. She was just standing there, perfectly still, facing away from us. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and she was wearing the same clothes described in the missing persons report: blue jeans, red flannel shirt, hiking boots. "Amy," I called out, "are you okay?" She didn't answer, didn't move, just stood there like a statue. Eddie and I looked at each other. This was wrong. People who've been missing in caves for 2 days don't just stand around in perfect condition. They're usually hurt, or scared, or hypothermic. They don't ignore rescue teams. "Amy Chen?" I tried again, louder this time. "We're park rangers. We're here to help you." Still, nothing. We started walking toward her, moving slow and careful. Cave rescues can be tricky. Sometimes people get confused or panicked when they see help coming. But as we got closer, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. Amy wasn't breathing. Her chest wasn't moving up and down. She was just standing there, perfectly still, like she was holding her breath. "Something's not right," Eddie whispered. I was about 10 feet away when Amy finally moved. She turned around, slow and smooth, like she was on some kind of invisible turntable. And when I saw her face, I almost dropped my light. It was Amy's face, but it was wrong. The features were all there, the right eyes, the right nose, the right mouth. But it was too perfect, like someone had studied a photograph and tried to copy it exactly. Her skin was too smooth, too even. Her eyes didn't blink. And when she smiled, her teeth were too white and too sharp. "Hello, James," she said in Amy's voice. "I've been waiting for you." I knew right then that this wasn't Amy Chen. I didn't know what it was, but it wasn't human. "Where are the others?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "They're here," Not Amy said. "They're all here. We're all here now." The way she said "we" made my blood turn cold, like there was more than one thing talking through Amy's mouth. "Eddie," I said quietly, not taking my eyes off the thing in front of me. "We need to get out of here." But when I looked over at Eddie, he was staring at something behind me. His face was white as a sheet. I turned around and saw them. Dr. Wells, Brad Foster, and Steve Kowalski, all standing in the chamber entrance. They looked just like Amy. Perfect copies of the missing people, but wrong in ways I couldn't quite put my finger on. "We've been waiting," Dr. Wells said in a voice that sounded like her, but flatter somehow. "We've been learning." "Learning what?" I asked. "Learning to be you," Brad Foster answered. "Learning to walk in your world." That's when I understood what Dr. Wells had meant about the echoes. These things weren't just copying how the scientists looked. They were copying how they talked, how they moved, how they acted. They were learning to be human. "What are you?" I asked. "We are what we need to be," Steve Kowalski said. "We are, or what you fear to lose." I looked at Eddie, and he was backing toward the chamber entrance, but the 4 copies were blocking our way out. "James," Eddie whispered, "look at their feet." I looked down and saw what he meant. The copies weren't leaving footprints. They were standing on the soft cave mud, but their feet weren't pressing down. They were just floating, maybe half an inch above the ground. "Mirror walkers," I breathed, remembering something an old Cherokee man had told me years ago. They steal reflections. They steal souls. The copy of Amy tilted her head like she was listening to something only she could hear. "Yes," she said. "That's what your people called us, before you forgot how to see." "What do you want?" I asked. "To walk in the light," Dr. Wells said. "To leave these dark places and live in your world." "We have been waiting so long," Brad Foster added, "waiting for the right ones to come, ones who know the deep places, ones who can show us the way up." I realized they were talking about Eddie and me. We were the ones who knew the cave systems, the ones who could guide them to the surface. They wanted to use us to get out of the underground world and into ours. "You killed them," I said, looking at the 4 copies. "You killed the scientists." "We became them," Amy said. "It is the same thing." "No," I said. "It's not." That's when Eddie made his move. He pulled out his emergency flare and lit it, filling the chamber with bright red light. The copies stepped back, hissing like cats. In the flare light, I could see them more clearly, and what I saw made me sick. Their skin was wrong. It looked like it was made of the same stuff as the cave walls, smooth limestone that had been carved to look like flesh. Their eyes were too dark, like looking into deep water, and when they moved, they didn't move quite right, like they were remembering how to. "Oh, walk." "The light burns them," Eddie said. "We need to get out of here." But as we started moving toward the entrance, the copies began to change. Their perfect human faces started to melt and shift, showing glimpses of something underneath. Something that lived in the dark places under the earth, something that had been waiting for a very long time. "You cannot leave," they said, all speaking at once in voices that didn't sound human anymore. "You have seen us. You know us. You must stay." The chamber started to change too. The walls began to move, shifting like they were made of water instead of stone. The entrance we'd come through was getting smaller, closing up like a wound healing. "Run," I told Eddie. "Run now." We ran for the shrinking entrance, diving through just as it closed behind us. But I could hear them following, their footsteps echoing in the tunnels. And worst of all, I could hear them talking to each other in our voices, mine and Eddie's, like they were already learning to be us. We ran through the tunnels like the devil himself was chasing us. Maybe he was. Our lights bounced off the cave walls, throwing wild shadows that seemed to move on their own. Behind us, I could hear footsteps, but they didn't sound right. They echoed too much, like the sound was bouncing off mirrors. "Which way?" Eddie gasped as we reached a junction I didn't remember. That stopped me cold. I knew every inch of this cave system. I'd mapped it myself, led tours through it dozens of times, but this junction wasn't supposed to be here. There should have been a straight passage leading back to Cathedral Chamber. "This is wrong," I said, trying to catch my breath. "This tunnel doesn't exist." "What do you mean it doesn't exist? We're standing in it." I looked around trying to get my bearings. The walls were the same limestone. The air had the same cave smell. But the shape was wrong. The angles were wrong. It was like someone had taken the real cave and twisted it into something else. "They're changing it," I realized. "They're changing the cave." Before Eddie could ask what I meant, we heard voices from the tunnel behind us. Our voices. "James, wait up!" It was my voice calling from the darkness. "I think I twisted my ankle." "That's not me," I whispered. "Eddie, help me." Now it was Eddie's voice coming from the same direction. "I'm hurt." Eddie started to move toward the sound, but I grabbed his arm. "That's not you either," I said. "Don't you see? They're learning to sound like us." The voices kept calling, begging for help in our own voices. It was the worst thing I'd ever heard, like listening to yourself die. We picked the left tunnel and kept moving. It sloped upward, which should have been good news, but nothing felt good anymore. The cave was playing tricks on us, changing when we weren't looking. Passages that should have led to familiar chambers opened onto rooms I'd never seen before. That's when we found Dr. Wells. The real Dr. Wells. She was in a small chamber about 50 feet down the left tunnel, sitting with her back against the wall. At first I thought she was just resting, but when I got closer, I saw the truth. Her face was gone, not cut off or damaged, just gone, like someone had peeled it away, leaving smooth skin underneath. She was still breathing, but her chest barely moved. When I touched her shoulder, she felt cold as cave water. "Jesus," Eddie whispered. "What did they do to her?" "They took her face," I said. "They took her face to wear it." I checked for a pulse. It was there, but weak and getting weaker. Dr. Wells was dying, and there was nothing we could do to help her. "We have to get out of here," I said. "We have to warn people." But as we started to leave, Dr. Wells grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. She couldn't talk, had no mouth to talk with, but she pointed deeper into the chamber. I followed her finger and saw what she was trying to show me. Brad Foster was there too, slumped in a corner. His face was also gone, peeled away like an old mask. Next to him was Steve Kowalski, in the same condition. All three of them were alive but fading, like their life was, being slowly drained away. "Where's Amy?" I asked Dr. Wells. She pointed to herself, then made a gesture like something being pulled away. I understood. Amy was the first one they'd taken. She was already gone. A sound from the tunnel made us both freeze. Footsteps coming our way. But these weren't the wrong echoes from before. These sounded normal, human. "James? Eddie?" It was a woman's voice, but not one I recognized. "Are you in there?" I looked at Eddie. We hadn't told anyone else where we were going. Nobody else should have been in the cave. "Who's there?" I called out. "It's Susan," the voice answered. "James, I was so worried about you. I came looking." My blood turned to ice. Susan was my wife, 6 months pregnant, and she was supposed to be at home in town. She'd never been in this cave system in her life. She was afraid of small spaces. "That's not Susan," I told Eddie. "James, please," the voice called, closer now. "I need your help. Something's wrong with the baby." Even knowing it wasn't real, those words hit me like a punch to the gut. The thing in the tunnel was using my deepest fears against me. "Don't listen," Eddie said. "It's one of them." But then I heard another voice. A man's voice, young and scared. "Dad? Dad, where are you?" Eddie went white. "That's my boy. That's Tommy." "It's not Tommy," I said. "Your son is 2 years old. He can't even talk in full sentences yet." "Dad, I'm scared. I'm lost in the dark." Eddie started walking toward the tunnel entrance, and I had to tackle him to stop him. "It's not real," I shouted. "None of it's real." But the voices kept calling, using the names of everyone we loved. My wife, Eddie's kids, my parents, his parents. They even used the name of the baby Susan was carrying, even though we hadn't told anyone what we were going to call him. That's when I knew how deep in trouble we really were. These things didn't just copy faces and voices. They could see inside our minds, pull out our memories, use our love against us. "We have to move," I said. "We have to get out of here before they trap us completely." We left Dr. Wells and the others behind. There was nothing we could do for them, and staying would just mean more people for the mirror walkers to copy. The tunnel system had changed again. Passages that should have led upward now led deeper into the earth. Chambers that should have been familiar were twisted into impossible shapes. It was like the cave was alive, reshaping itself to keep us trapped. "This isn't possible," Eddie said as we reached another junction that shouldn't have existed. "Nothing about this is possible," I replied. "But it's happening anyway." We heard them coming before we saw them. Multiple sets of footsteps, all moving in perfect sync. When they came into view, I almost lost my mind. There were 6 of them now. The 4 copies of the scientists, plus 2 more. Copies of me and Eddie. They looked exactly like us, down to the smallest details. Same clothes, same equipment, same scars and marks. The copy of me even had the small scar on my chin from when I'd cut myself shaving that morning. "Hello, James," my copy said in my voice. "We've been waiting for you." "We know everything about you," Eddie's copy added. "We know about Susan. We know about the baby. We know about the night you thought you heard something in the woods behind your house." That last part hit me like a sledgehammer. I'd never told anyone about that night, not even Susan. I'd convinced myself it was just my imagination, just the wind in the trees. But something had been watching me from the woods behind our house, and now these things knew about it. "What do you want?" I asked. "To be you," my copy said. "To walk in the light. To have what you have." "We have been alone so long," that's Eddie's copy added. "Waiting in the dark, watching from the deep places. But now we can leave. Now we can take your place." "People will know," I said. "They'll know you're not really us." "Will they?" my copy asked. "We have your memories. We know your wife's favorite song. We know the way you touch her face when you think she's sleeping. We know the sound you make when you're worried about the baby." I felt sick. These things had been inside my head, stealing my most private thoughts. "We know about Eddie's nightmares," my copy continued. "About the cave-in that almost killed him 3 years ago. We know about the scars on his back that he's never shown his wife." Eddie made a choking sound. That was something he'd never told anyone, not even me. "We can be you better than you can," Eddie's copy said. "We will love your families. We will care for your children. We will be perfect." "You're not human," I said. "You don't understand love. You don't understand what it means to be us." "We will learn," my copy said. "We are very good at learning." That's when I noticed something. The copies were perfect, but they weren't quite right. They stood too still, breathed too evenly. They were like photographs that had learned to move. "Eddie," I whispered, "look at their eyes." He looked, and I saw him understand. The copy's eyes didn't move naturally. They stared straight ahead, only turning when they needed to focus on something. Real people's eyes are always moving, always looking around. But these things forgot to do that. "We need to split up," I said quietly. "Confuse them. Are you crazy? We need to stick together. Trust me. On 3, you go left, I go right. Ready?" Before Eddie could argue, I counted to 3 and we bolted in different directions. The copies hesitated for just a second, like they couldn't decide which of us to follow. That second was all we needed. I ran down the right tunnel, hearing my copy's footsteps behind me. But I knew something it didn't. This tunnel looked new, but it was based on a real passage, one that had a hidden connection to the main cave system. The connection was there, just where I expected it. A narrow crack in the wall that led to a passage I'd discovered years ago. I squeezed through, hoping the copy was too perfect to fit. I was wrong. It came through right behind me, moving like liquid through the narrow space, but that was okay. I had a plan. The narrow passage led to a chamber I'd always called the Echo Room. It was perfectly round, with smooth walls that could carry a whisper from one side to the other. More importantly, it had 3 exits, and I knew exactly where each one led. My copy followed me into the chamber, moving with that too-perfect stillness that gave them away. In the glow of my headlamp, it looked exactly like me, but I could see the wrongness now, the way it held its shoulders, the way it didn't quite breathe right. "You cannot escape," it said in my voice. "We are you now. We know everything you know." "Do you?" I asked. "Do you know why I really became a park ranger? To help people. To protect the wilderness. To—" "Wrong," I said. "I became a park ranger because I was afraid of the dark." The copy tilted its head, confused. That wasn't in my surface memories, the easy ones it had stolen. "When I was 8 years old," I continued, "I got lost in Mammoth Cave during a family trip. Spent 6 hours alone in the dark, crying and calling for help. I was so scared I wet myself. When they finally found me, I swore I'd never be helpless in the dark again." The copy's face flickered like a TV with bad reception. It was trying to access a memory it didn't have. "That's not in your mind," it said. "Because it's not a memory," I said. "It's a feeling. It's fear that turned into determination. It's shame that turned into strength. You can copy my thoughts, but you can't copy my emotions. You can't copy what it means to be human." I started walking toward Anpa, of the exits, the one that led to the deepest part of the cave system. "You're right about one thing," I said. "I do know these caves better than anyone, including places that aren't on any map, places where things like you belong." The copy followed me, but it was moving differently now, less sure of itself. I'd planted doubt in its mind, and doubt was something it couldn't handle. The passage led downward, deeper into the earth than most people ever go. The air got colder, and the walls got wetter. This was the original cave system, the one that had been here for thousands of years before humans ever set foot in Tennessee. "Where are you going?" the copy asked. "Home," I said. "Your home." We came to a chamber that wasn't on any map, one I'd discovered by accident years ago and never reported. It was huge, so big my light couldn't reach the far walls. But I could feel the space around me, the way the air moved and the sounds echoed. And in the center of the chamber was a pool of water so dark, it looked like a hole in the world. "This is where you come from," I said. "This is where you belong." The copy looked at the dark water, and for the first time, I saw something like fear in its stolen face. "We came from the deep places," it said, "but we do not wish to return." "Too bad," I said, "because you're going back." I had one flare left, the big one from my emergency kit. I lit it and threw it into the center of the chamber. The red light exploded through the darkness, and suddenly I could see everything. The chamber was full of them. Hundreds of mirror walkers, all hanging from the ceiling like bats, all twisted and wrong. They were the source, the nest, the place where all the copies came from, and they were all staring at me with eyes like black water. The copy beside me started to scream, but not with my voice. With its real voice, the sound something makes when it's been pulled from the deep earth and forced into the light. "You cannot destroy us," it said. "We are eternal. We are the fear that lives in the dark places of your mind." "Maybe," said, "but you're not me, and you're not getting out of here." I pulled out my emergency charges, the small explosives we carried for clearing blocked passages. I'd never used them before, but I knew how they worked. "If I blow this chamber," I said, "the whole section will collapse. You'll be trapped down here forever." "You will die too," the copy said. "Maybe. But you won't get to hurt my family. You won't get to hurt anyone." I started setting the charges around the chamber walls. The mirror walkers on the ceiling were getting agitated, making sounds like wind through a graveyard. The copy that looked like me was backing toward the dark pool in the center. "We can make you a deal," it said. "We can let you go. You can return to your wife, your child. You can live a normal life. And in return, we take someone else, someone you do not know, someone who means nothing to you." For a moment I was tempted. The thought of seeing Susan again, of holding our baby, of going back to our normal life, it was almost too much to resist. But then I remembered Dr. Wells and the others, their faces peeled away, their lives slowly draining. I thought about all the people who might come after us, the hikers and cavers and scientists who would disappear into the dark. "No deal," I said, and lit the fuse. The copy of me let out a sound like breaking glass and dove into the dark pool. The mirror walkers on the ceiling began to drop, falling like dead leaves. They hit the ground and scattered, running for passages that led even deeper into the earth. I ran for the exit as the fuses burned down. Behind me, the chamber filled with the sound of ancient things fleeing back to the deep places where they belonged. The explosion knocked me flat, and rocks rained down around me, but the passage held, and I managed to crawl out into the main cave system as the whole section behind me collapsed. I found Eddie at the entrance to Cathedral Chamber, standing over the real Amy Chen. She was unconscious but breathing, her face pale but intact. The copies had left her behind when they fled. "Are you okay?" he asked. "I'm alive," I said. "That's more than I expected." We carried Amy out of the cave and into the sunlight. She woke up in the hospital 3 days later with no memory of what had happened. The official report said there had been a cave-in, that we'd rescued one survivor and the others had been lost. But I knew the truth. And sometimes, late at night, I wondered if the copy of me had made it out through some other passage. If it was out there somewhere, learning to be human, waiting for its chance to take my place. That was 45 years ago, and I still think about it every day. Susan and I had our baby, a beautiful boy we named David. He grew up, went to college, became a doctor. He has kids of his own now, grandchildren I love more than life itself. But I never stopped watching the shadows, never stopped checking my reflection in mirrors, looking for signs that something else was looking back. Susan died 10 years ago, cancer, and I held her hand until the very end. If I was a copy, if I was one of those things from the deep places, would I have felt that pain? Would I have cried like I did? Would I have missed her every single day since? I think I would. I think the real horror isn't that the mirror walkers might replace us. It's that they might replace us so perfectly that even we couldn't tell the difference. Eddie retired a few years after the incident. He moved to Florida, wanted to get as far from caves as possible. We still call each other on Christmas, and every year he asks me the same question. "Are you still you?" And every year I tell him yes, but I'm never completely sure. The caves are still there, of course. The Park Service sealed off the section where we found the mirror walkers, but there are other passages, other ways into the deep places. Sometimes hikers report strange encounters, glimpses of people who look exactly like them, voices calling from the darkness that sound like their own. Most people don't believe those stories. They think it's just the imagination, just the fear that comes from being alone in the dark. But I know better. I know that some things are too strange to be anything but true. Amy Chen became a professor, teaching geology at a small college in Ohio. She never went into another cave, never talked about what happened that day. But she sends me a Christmas card every year, and she always writes the same thing. "Thank you for bringing me home." I don't know if she remembers what really happened or if her mind just filled in the gaps with something it could handle. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe the important thing is that she's alive, that she's human, that she's living the life those things wanted to steal from her. I'm 79 now, too old for cave rescues, too old for much of anything except sitting on my porch and watching the mountains. But I still keep my emergency kit by the door, still keep fresh batteries in my flashlight, still listen for sounds that don't belong, because I know they're still down there, in the deep places where the light never reaches, waiting for the next person to come too close, to wander too far from the safe paths, waiting for their chance to walk in the light again. And sometimes, late at night when the wind is blowing through the mountains, I think I can hear them calling, using voices I recognize, faces I love, saying all the right words to make me come back down into the darkness. But I don't go. I stay in the light, surrounded by the life I've built, the love I've shared, the memories that prove I'm real. Because that's what makes us human. Not just the way we look or the things we know, but the connections we make, the love we give, the way we choose to live even when we're afraid. The mirror walkers can copy everything about us except that. They can steal our faces, our voices, our memories, but they can't steal our souls. They can't steal what it really means to be human. At least I hope. They can't. Because if they ever figure that out, if they ever learn to love the way we love, to feel the way we feel, to be human in every way that matters, then God help us all. The mountains are quiet tonight, but I know they're listening. And deep below, in the places where the earth keeps its oldest secrets, something is learning to be us. Something is getting better at it every day. My name is Michael Stonecrow, and I need to tell you what really happened in Red Rock Canyon back in August of 1963. The official report says it was a flash flood that killed those archaeologists. But that's a lie. I wrote that lie myself. I've been a forest ranger for 21 years now, and I've seen my share of strange things out in the desert. But nothing like what happened at the old cliff dwelling. Nothing that made me question everything I thought I knew about the world. The heat that August was brutal, even for Arizona. The thermometer hit 115 degrees most days, and the red sandstone cliffs seemed to glow like coals in the sun. I was stationed at the Coconino National Forest, specializing in archaeological site protection. My job was to keep treasure hunters and vandals away from the ancient ruins scattered throughout the canyon. I'm half Navajo on my mother's side. My grandfather was a medicine man, though I never paid much attention to his stories when I was growing up. I was more interested in getting an education, becoming something respectable. I went to college, studied archaeology and forest management. I wanted to bridge two worlds, protecting my people's heritage while working within the system. My son Robert was starting his sophomore year at Northern Arizona University. All those years of working double shifts and saving every penny were finally paying off. He wanted to be a teacher, maybe work on the reservation someday. I was proud of him for caring about our culture, even if I'd moved away from it myself. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. Dr. Richard Hamilton from the University of Arizona had been leading a small team at a newly discovered site in Red Rock Canyon. They were 3 days overdue for their scheduled check-in. Probably just lost track of time, my supervisor said. You know how those professor types get when they find something interesting. But I had a bad feeling about it. The site was remote, about 50 miles from the nearest town, accessible only by hiking through rough terrain. If something had gone wrong, they'd have no way to call for help. I packed my gear and headed out before dawn. The drive to the trailhead took 2 hours on dusty back roads. As I got closer to the canyon, I noticed something strange. No birds. Usually the desert was full of ravens and hawks, but the sky was empty. Even the insects seemed quieter than usual. The hike to the site took most of the morning. The trail wound through narrow canyons and over rocky ledges. Ancient petroglyphs marked the way, carved into the red stone by people who lived here 1,000 years ago. My grandfather always said these old places were sacred, that some of them should be left alone. But I figured that was just superstition. When I finally reached the archaeological site, I knew something was very wrong. The camp was destroyed. Tents were shredded, equipment scattered everywhere. But it wasn't the random destruction of a flash flood or windstorm. There was a pattern to it, almost like someone had arranged things deliberately. The worst part was what I found carved into the canyon wall. Strange symbols cut deep into the red rock. They weren't ancestral Puebloan petroglyphs. I knew those well enough. These were different, cruder, more recent. and they seemed to spiral around a dark opening in the cliff face that I'd never noticed before. I called out for the missing team, but my voice just echoed back from the canyon walls. The silence was so complete it made my skin crawl. Even the wind had stopped blowing. That's when I saw the bones. They were arranged in careful patterns around what looked like a ceremonial circle. Animal bones mostly. Deer, rabbits. A few I couldn't identify. But mixed in with them were others. Larger ones. I didn't want to think about what they might be from. I knew I needed backup, but when I tried to radio for help, I got only static. My compass was spinning wildly, pointing to different directions every few seconds. Something was interfering with my equipment. As the sun started to set, painting the canyon walls blood red, I made a decision that probably saved my life. Instead of camping at the site, I hiked back down the trail and spent the night in my truck. I told myself it was just being cautious, following procedure. But the truth was that place scared me in a way I couldn't explain. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me from the shadows of that ancient ruin. I went back the next morning, but this time I wasn't alone. My Uncle Joseph had driven up from the reservation after I called him the night before. He was my grandfather's younger brother, about 70 years old, with long gray hair and eyes that seemed to see more than they should. "You shouldn't have come here alone," he said as we hiked up the trail. "This is not a good place." "It's just an archaeological site, Uncle. The university team was doing legitimate research." He shook his head. "Some places are meant to stay buried. Your grandfather knew this. He tried to teach you, but you were too busy with your books." I was about to argue when we reached the campsite. In daylight, the destruction looked even worse. Uncle Joseph walked slowly around the area, studying the carved symbols on the canyon wall. His face grew darker with each step. "This is old work," he said finally. "Very old. But someone has been here recently, disturbing things that should not be disturbed." He pointed to tracks in the sandy soil, footprints that seemed to shift between human and animal. Some looked like bare feet, others like paws or hooves. They circled the ceremonial bone arrangement in a pattern that made my head spin to follow. "We need to leave," Uncle Joseph said. "Now." But I had a job to do. 4 people were missing, and I was responsible for finding them. I started searching the area more carefully, looking for any sign of where they might have gone. That's when I found Dr. Hamilton. He was about a quarter-mile from the campsite, at the bottom of a narrow ravine. At first glance, it looked like he'd fallen from the cliff above, but when I got closer, I saw what had really happened to him. His skin had been removed in careful strips, like someone had been peeling an orange. But he was still alive when I found him. Barely. Don't let it take the others," he whispered. His eyes were wide with terror, staring at something behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing there, just red rock and shadows. Dr. Hamilton died before I could get him out of the ravine, but not before he told me what they'd found in the hidden chamber. Ancient burial goods, ceremonial objects, and something else. Something that should have been left alone. "We opened it," he said. "We opened the sealed chamber. There was a body inside, wrapped in animal skins. But when we touched it, it moved." Uncle Joseph was waiting for me when I climbed back up to the campsite. He took one look at my face and nodded grimly. "You found one of them." "How did you know?" "Because I can smell it on you now. The scent of death and old magic." He started unpacking a leather bag I hadn't noticed before. "This is why I came. Your grandfather made me promise to watch over you, even if you didn't believe." Inside the bag were things I recognized from my childhood. Eagle feathers, small bundles of sage, a necklace made from turquoise and silver, medicine tools. "Uncle, I appreciate the concern, but this is a police matter now. I need to call for backup, get a proper search team out here." "Your radio won't work," he said calmly, "and your compass will keep spinning. This place is between worlds now. The old boundaries have been broken." I tried the radio again. Still nothing but static. My compass was still spinning like a broken toy. As the sun started to set, Uncle Joseph began to build a fire, but he wasn't using ordinary wood. He burned sage and cedar, muttering prayers in Navajo that I half remembered from childhood. The smoke made strange patterns in the still air. "Tell me about the chamber," he said. "What exactly did they find?" I described what Dr. Hamilton had told me: the sealed room, the wrapped body, the moment when everything went wrong. Uncle Joseph listened without interrupting, his face growing more troubled with each detail. "Skinwalker," he said finally. "A very old one. They bound it in that chamber long ago, used the proper rituals to keep it sleeping. But when your archaeologists broke the seals—" "Uncle, please, I know you believe in these old stories, but there has to be a rational explanation." He pointed to the darkness beyond our small fire. "Then explain that." I looked where he was pointing and felt my blood turn to ice. Something was moving in the shadows between the canyon walls. Something that walked on 4 legs, then 2, then 4 again. It was too far away to see clearly, but I caught glimpses of fur and bare skin, of eyes that reflected the firelight like an animal's. "It's hunting," Uncle Joseph said quietly. "Looking for the ones who disturbed its rest." "How many were in the research team?" 4, Dr. Hamilton, Janet Morrison, Carlos Vasquez, and Beth Williams. "Then 3 are still alive, but not for long." The thing in the shadows let out a sound that wasn't quite human, wasn't quite animal. It was like hearing someone scream while their throat was changing shape. The sound echoed off the canyon walls, coming from all directions at once. Uncle Joseph threw more sage on the fire. The flames flared up, casting dancing shadows on the red stone walls. For a moment, I thought I saw the creature clearly, a human figure wearing the pelts of different animals, its face shifting between human and something else. Then it was gone, vanished into the darkness like smoke. "We can stay here," I said, reaching for my rifle. "We can't leave either," Uncle Joseph replied. "It knows we're here now. It can smell the disturbance we carry. If we try to run, it will hunt us down in the open desert." He was right. I could feel it out there, circling our camp like a wolf stalking wounded prey. Every shadow seemed to hide watching eyes. Every sound might be footsteps coming closer. We spent the night taking turns, keeping watch, feeding the fire, and listening to the thing prowling just beyond the light. Sometimes it sounded like it was right next to us. Other times it seemed miles away. But it was always there, always hunting. By morning, I was beginning to understand that my old life, the life where I was just a forest ranger dealing with normal problems, was over. The next day, we found Janet Morrison. She was hanging from a dead tree about a mile from the campsite, but she wasn't exactly dead. Not entirely. Her body had been changed. Human skin replaced with patches of animal fur, her hands twisted into claws, her face stretched into something between human and wolf. When she saw us, she tried to speak, but only animal sounds came out. Her eyes were still human, though, still terrified and aware of what had happened to her. "Can you help her?" I asked Uncle Joseph. He studied her for a long moment, then shook his head sadly. "She's too far gone. The transformation is nearly complete. In a few more hours, she'll be like the thing that did this to her. There has to be something we can do." "There is." He pulled out a knife with a bone handle. "We can end her suffering before she becomes a monster." I couldn't do it. I know I should have, but I couldn't. Instead, we tied her to the tree and moved on, hoping to find the other 2 researchers before it was too late. Uncle Joseph wasn't happy with my decision. "You still don't understand what we're ailing with," he said. "This isn't just about killing people. It's about taking them, changing them, making them part of its pack. Every person it transforms makes it stronger." We followed. The tracks deeper into the canyon, past ruins I'd never seen before. The walls were covered with pictographs showing human figures transforming into animals, ritual dances around bone piles, and something that looked like a door between worlds. "Your grandfather came here once," Uncle Joseph said, stopping at a particular set of drawings. "Back in the 1920s. There was a trading post owner who went missing, and the tribal council asked him to investigate. He found the same thing we're dealing with now. What happened? He sealed it away, used the old rituals, the proper ceremonies, but he always said it was just sleeping, not dead. Said someday someone would be foolish enough to wake it up again. We found Carlos Vasquez that afternoon. He was still alive, but barely. The creature had been playing with him, making small changes over several days. One arm was covered in thick black fur, his teeth had grown into fangs, and his eyes had turned yellow. "Kill me," he begged when he saw us. "Please, before it comes back. I can feel it changing me from the inside. I can feel its thoughts mixing with mine." This time, I didn't hesitate. I couldn't let him suffer like Janet Morrison was suffering. Uncle Joseph said a prayer in Navajo as Carlos died, asking the spirits to guide his soul safely to the next world. "Where's Beth Williams?" I asked. Carlos pointed deeper into the canyon with his normal hand. "It took her to the old place, the chamber they opened. It's keeping her alive for last, wants to make her watch what it does to the rest of us." Uncle Joseph was studying the tracks around where we'd found Carlos. "It's getting stronger," he said. "The transformations are happening faster now. And look at this." He pointed to a set of prints in the sand. They started as human footprints, but as they moved forward, they changed. The toes grew longer, the heel shifted, and by the end, they were clearly animal paws. "It's not just wearing animal skins anymore," he said. "It's becoming them, learning to shift between forms." We followed the tracks back toward the original campsite, but took a different route that led higher up the canyon walls. From there, we could see the ancient cliff dwelling clearly. It was much larger than I'd realized, built into a natural cave system that extended deep into the rock. "There," Uncle Joseph pointed to a dark opening about halfway up the cliff face. "That's where they found the burial chamber. And that's where it's taken the last woman." As we watched, something moved in the shadows of the cave entrance. For just a moment, I saw it clearly. A figure that seemed to be made of shifting shadows and animal parts. It was wearing human skin like a coat, but underneath, I could see the outline of something else. Something that had never been human. "It knows we're here," Uncle Joseph said quietly. "It's been watching us all along." The creature let out another of those horrible mixed sounds, part human scream, part animal howl. This time, I heard an echo from behind us, then another from the left, and another from the right. "There's more than one," I said, my throat dry with fear. "No," Uncle Joseph said, but his voice was shaking. "It's the same creature, but it's learned to use the bones of its victims. It can animate them, make them hunt for it." That's when I saw them. Skeletal figures moving through the ruins below us, their bones held together by nothing but the creature's will. Some were human skeletons, others were animals, and a few were horrible mixtures of both. "We need to get out of here," I said, reaching for my rifle. "Your bullets won't stop those things," Uncle Joseph said, "and we can't leave the woman. If it completes the transformation on her, if it makes her willingly join its pack, then it won't need to hide anymore. It will be free to hunt throughout the entire region." He started pulling items from his medicine bag, eagle feathers, small stones painted with symbols, a rattle made from a turtle shell. "There's only one way to stop this. We have to go into the chamber and face it directly. That's suicide. Maybe. But if we don't try, it will keep growing stronger. Next month, it will be a family of campers. Next year, it could be an entire town." He looked at me with eyes that reminded me of my grandfather. "This is why you were meant to be here, Michael. Not to be a forest ranger protecting archaeological sites. To be a guardian protecting the living from the dead." As the sun started to set, casting long shadows across the canyon, we began our descent toward the ancient cliff dwelling. Behind us, the animated bones followed, clicking and rattling as they moved. Above us, the creature waited in its chamber, wearing the faces of its victims and speaking in their voices. And somewhere in that dark cave, Beth Williams was still alive, watching her humanity slowly slip away. The climb to the cliff dwelling was the longest 20 minutes of my life. The skeletal figures followed us up the narrow ledges, their bones clicking against the rock like castanets. Every few feet, Uncle Joseph would stop to scatter consecrated cornmeal or burn a small bundle of sage, but the protective rituals only slowed them down. "It's testing us," he said, as we reached the cave entrance. "Seeing how strong our medicine is?" The opening was smaller than it looked from below, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Inside, the darkness was absolute. I switched on my flashlight, but the beam seemed to get swallowed up after just a few feet. "Turn that off," Uncle Joseph whispered. "We need to see with more than our eyes." He lit a torch made from juniper bark and animal fat. The flickering light revealed passages carved into the living rock, walls covered with pictographs I'd never seen before. These weren't the peaceful farming scenes typical of ancestral Puebloan art. These showed hunts, transformations, and rituals that looked more like torture. We followed the main passage deeper into the cave system. The air grew colder and smelled of death and something else. Something wild and animal. Behind us, I could hear the bone creatures trying to squeeze through the entrance, their skeletal forms grinding against the rock. "Beth!" I called out. "Beth Williams, can you hear me?" My voice echoed back from the depths of the cave, but there was no answer. Just the sound of our footsteps and the distant clicking of bones. We found the burial chamber at the end of a long, narrow tunnel. It was a circular room about 20 feet across, with a raised platform in the center. Ancient pottery and ceremonial objects lined the walls, but most of them had been disturbed or broken. Beth Williams was there, tied to a wooden frame in the center of the platform. She was still alive, but barely recognizable. Her skin had a grayish tint, her hair was falling out in patches, and her eyes had turned the same yellow as Carlos's. "Help me," she whispered when she saw us. "It's been changing me. Slowly. Making me watch what it does to the others." But even as she spoke, I could see the transformation wasn't just physical. When she looked at us, there was something hungry in her eyes, something that saw us as prey rather than rescuers. "Where is it?" I asked, looking around the chamber. "Here," said a voice from the shadows. But it wasn't just one voice. It was Dr. Hamilton and Janet Morrison and Carlos Vasquez, all speaking at once. "We've been waiting for you, Michael Stonecrow." The creature stepped into the torchlight, and I finally saw it clearly. It was wearing the skins of all its victims like a patchwork coat, but underneath, I could see its true form, something that had never been human, something ancient and hungry and utterly alien to our world. "You've been running from your heritage for so long," it said, now speaking in my grandfather's voice. "But you can't run from what you are. You carry the old blood, the blood of those who knew how to hunt and transform and survive." "Don't listen to it," Uncle Joseph said, raising his medicine bundle. "It's trying to confuse you." The creature laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Old man, your medicine is weak. The world has changed since your grandfather's time. The boundaries between worlds are breaking down. Soon, there will be no difference between the living and the dead, between human and animal, between what is and what was." It gestured to Beth Williams. "She understands now. She's seen what I can offer. Power, freedom from the weak flesh that holds you back, the ability to become whatever you need to be." Beth's eyes were glowing now, and when she spoke, her voice was changing, becoming something between human and animal. "Join us, Michael. You don't have to fight this. You can be part of something greater." "She's too far gone," Uncle Joseph said quietly. "The transformation is complete. She's one of them now." The creature began to change, its form shifting and flowing like smoke. One moment it looked human, the next it was a wolf, then a bear, then something that had never existed in nature. "This is what your people once were," it said. "Before the white man's schools and churches and laws. Before you forgot how to hunt with tooth and claw." "We were never like you," I said, but my voice was shaking. "We were guardians, protectors." "Guardians of what? This dead rock? These empty ruins?" The creature's form solidified into something vaguely human, but with too many teeth and eyes that reflected the torchlight. I offer you life, Michael. Real life. The kind that doesn't hide behind badges and uniforms and rules. Uncle Joseph stepped forward, raising his medicine bundle. Michael, you need to choose now. Who are you? Who do you want to be? The creature hissed and backed away from the medicine bundle, but it didn't retreat far. The old ways are dying, medicine man. Your grandson already knows this. He's been running from them his whole life. And it was right. I had been running. From my grandfather's teachings, from the stories about spirits and skinwalkers, from everything that connected me to the old ways. I'd wanted to be modern, educated, respectable. I'd wanted to fit into the white world. But standing in that ancient chamber, surrounded by the bones of the dead and the smell of old magic, I realized something. I hadn't been running from superstition. I'd been running from responsibility. You're right, I said to the creature. I have been running, but not from my heritage, from my duty. I reached out and took the medicine bundle from Uncle Joseph's hands. The moment I touched it, I felt something change inside me. Not a transformation like the creature offered, but a connection. To my grandfather, to the generations of guardians who had come before me, to the responsibility I'd been born to carry. I know what you are, I said to the creature, and I know what I am. The creature's form began to shift again, growing larger and more threatening. Then you know that you cannot stop me. I am older than your people, older than your medicine, older than your precious boundaries between worlds. Maybe, I said, opening the medicine bundle, but I don't have to stop you. I just have to send you back where you belong. Uncle Joseph began to chant in Navajo, words I remembered from childhood but had never understood. Now somehow I knew what they meant. They were binding words, sealing words, the same ritual my grandfather had used all those years ago. The creature lunged at us, its form shifting into something with claws and fangs and burning eyes. But as Uncle Joseph's voice rose, as the medicine bundle in my hands began to glow with its own inner light, the creature, its attack slowed, then stopped. You cannot, it hissed. The seals are broken. The boundaries are gone. Then we'll make new ones, I said, and began to chant along with Uncle Joseph. The creature screamed, a sound that was every victim it had ever taken, every life it had stolen, every boundary it had crossed. The sound echoed through the chamber, through the entire cave system, and I felt something shift in the very foundations of the world. Light began to pour from the medicine bundle, not the harsh white light of my flashlight, but something warmer, older, more alive. The creature's form began to dissolve, its stolen skins falling away like old leaves. This is not over, it whispered as it faded. The world is changing. Soon, there will be no place for your kind of guardian. Then it was gone, pulled back into whatever dark realm it had come from. The sudden silence was deafening. Beth Williams collapsed, her body returning to its normal human form. But her eyes remained closed, and her breathing was shallow. Is she alive? I asked. Uncle Joseph knelt beside her and checked her pulse. Barely. The transformation damaged her, but she might survive if we get her to a hospital quickly. As we carried Beth out of the chamber, I noticed that the bone creatures had stopped moving. They lay scattered throughout the cave system like broken toys, just ordinary skeletons again. We emerged from the cliff dwelling just as the sun was rising, painting the canyon walls gold and red. In the distance, I could see dust clouds that meant help was finally coming. A search and rescue team, probably alerted when I failed to check in. What do we tell them? I asked Uncle Joseph. Whatever they need to hear, he said. But you know the truth now, and you know what you have to do. I looked back at the ancient cliff dwelling, at the dark opening that led to the burial chamber. The creature was gone, but the chamber remained. And someday, someone else might be curious enough to break the seals again. I'll watch over it, I said. Make sure it stays sealed. Uncle Jos. Eve nodded. Your grandfather would be proud. You've finally come home. The official report was simple. Flash flood. The archaeological team had camped in a wash that became a raging torrent during a sudden thunderstorm. Dr. Hamilton, Janet Morrison, and Carlos Vasquez had been swept away and killed. Beth Williams had been found unconscious but alive, suffering from exposure and trauma-induced amnesia. The site was declared geologically unstable and closed to further archaeological study. I made sure of that. Beth Williams recovered mostly. She spent 2 months in a psychiatric hospital, claiming she couldn't remember anything about the expedition. But sometimes, when she thought no one was looking, I'd catch her staring at the sky like she was watching for something. And she never went camping again. I transferred to a different district, one that included several remote archaeological sites. My new job description was the same as before, protecting ancient ruins from vandalism and theft. But I knew the real reason I was there. I was a guardian, just like my grandfather had been. Uncle Joseph visited me every few months, bringing new medicine bundles and teaching me rituals I should have learned as a child. He never said, "I told you so," but I could see the satisfaction in his eyes. The family tradition would continue. My son Robert noticed the change in me when he came home for Christmas. "Dad, you seem different," he said. More like Grandpa used to be. "Maybe I'm just getting older," I told him. But I started teaching him some of the old stories, the ones my grandfather had tried to teach me, just in case. The Red Rock Canyon site remained closed, but I checked on it regularly. The seals were holding, the chamber stayed dark, and the desert wildlife had returned to normal, most of the time. But sometimes, on nights when the moon was dark and the wind was still, I'd hear something moving in the canyon. Not the creature, that was gone, sent back to whatever realm it had come from. But its presence had left echoes, cracks in the boundary between worlds. Other things were starting to notice those cracks. I keep my grandfather's medicine bundle in my truck now, along with my ranger equipment. I've learned to read the signs, the way birds avoid certain areas, how animals act when something unnatural is nearby, the feeling in the air when reality starts to bend. 3 years after the Red Rock Canyon incident, I got a call about missing hikers near another ancient site. The description was familiar: camp destroyed, strange symbols carved in rocks, animal bones arranged in patterns. I packed my gear and headed out, Uncle Joseph riding beside me. As we drove through the desert, he asked the question I'd been dreading. "Do you think it's the same creature?" "No," I said, "but I think it's something similar, something that was waiting for the boundaries to weaken." He nodded grimly. "Your grandfather always said that once the seals start breaking, others will follow. The old things are patient, but they never give up." We reached the new site just as the sun was setting. The missing hikers were college students, young and curious and completely unprepared for what they'd stumbled into. But this time, I was ready. I am Michael Stonecrow, guardian of the spaces between worlds. I protect the living from the dead, the present from the past, the possible from the impossible. It's not the job I thought I wanted, but it's the job I was born to do. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the firelight, I can hear something moving, something hungry, something that knows I'm here and knows what I carry. The hunt begins again, but this time I won't be running. My name is Theodore Blackwater, and I've been a forest ranger for 8 years now. People call me Teddy, but after what happened at Basswood Lake, I don't much like talking to people anymore. I came back from Korea in 1946 with shaky hands and bad dreams. The Army doctors said I'd get better with time, but some nights I still wake up hearing artillery shells. The woods help, though, out here in the Boundary Waters, 60 miles from the nearest town. It's quiet enough that my mind can finally rest. I know these lakes better than most folks know their own backyards. Every inlet, every rocky shore, every spot where the water runs deep. I can paddle a canoe through fog, thick as soup, and still find my way home. I've got a little float plane, too. Nothing fancy. Just a Piper Cub with pontoons that gets me around when the water's too rough for paddling. July 1954 was the hottest summer anyone could remember. The air hung heavy and still, like a wet blanket you couldn't shake off. Even the mosquitoes seemed too tired to bite. For 3 weeks straight, there wasn't a breath of wind anywhere. The lakes turned flat as mirrors, so clear you could see straight down 200 feet to the bottom. That's when Walter Kowalski went missing. Walter was the best fishing guide in Minnesota. Been taking folks out on these waters for 20 years. Knew every trick the fish had. He'd taken an elderly couple from Chicago, Harvey and Dorothy Miller, out to Basswood Lake for a 3-day trip. Should have been back Tuesday morning. When Wednesday came and went with no sign of them, the sheriff called me. I flew over Basswood Lake that afternoon, circling low in my little plane. The water was so still it looked like glass, but something felt wrong. Usually you'd see fish jumping, loons floating around, something alive. This time, nothing. Just empty water stretching out to the Canadian border. Then I spotted their boat. It was floating upside down about a mile from shore, white bottom gleaming in the sun like a dead fish belly. No sign of the people, no sign of any trouble either. The weather had been perfect for days. Walter's boat was a good one, built to handle anything these lakes could throw at it. I radioed back to headquarters. Found the boat. No people. I'm going in for a closer look. Be careful, Teddy, came the scratchy reply. Water's been acting strange all week. Johnson says his outboard died on him 3 times yesterday, and his compass started spinning like a top. I laughed it off then. Johnson was getting old. Probably just maintenance issues. But as I brought my plane down for a water landing, my own engine started coughing. Never happened before. I've kept that Piper in perfect shape since I bought her. The engine smoothed out once I was on the water, but something else bothered me. The lake felt too warm. In July, these deep lakes stay cold even when the air gets hot. But this water was like bath water, especially near the middle where it should have been coldest. I paddled my emergency canoe over to Walter's overturned boat. Soon as I got close, I saw the claw marks. They ran along the bottom of the boat in parallel lines, each groove deep enough to stick my finger in. Whatever made them had claws bigger than any bear I'd ever seen. But bears don't attack boats in the middle of a lake. Bears don't swim 200 yards from shore to flip over a 20-foot fishing boat. The marks were fresh, too. White wood showed through where something had scraped away the paint and varnish. But there wasn't any blood, no bits of clothing, nothing to show what happened to Walter and the Millers. I tied Walter's boat to my canoe and started towing it back to shore. That's when I noticed my compass needle spinning lazy circles, like it couldn't decide. Which way was north? And my watch had stopped, hands frozen at 3:17. The sun was getting low by the time I reached the landing. Peter Kingbird was waiting for me, old Ojibwe fellow who'd been guiding fishermen since before I was born. Peter knew these waters better than anyone, knew stories about them that went back generations. Bad business, Teddy, he said, helping me drag the boats up on shore. My grandfather used to tell stories about this lake, said there were things living down deep that didn't like visitors. Come on, Peter. You don't really believe that old stuff. He looked at me with those dark eyes of his, serious as a funeral. Believe it? Son, I've been avoiding the deep parts of this lake for 60 years. My grandfather called them the lake sleepers. Said they'd been down there since before the first people came to this land. Lake sleepers? Things that look like people but bigger, stronger. They don't like folks messing around in their territory. Peter pointed out toward the deep water. Grandfather said they could reach up and pull a man down from 50 feet away, make him drown without even touching the water. I wanted to laugh, but something in Peter's voice stopped me, and those claw marks on Walter's boat weren't from any normal animal. We need to search for survivors, I said. Sheriff's organizing a diving team for tomorrow morning. Peter shook his head. Won't find nothing with divers. Lake sleepers don't leave bodies where folks can find them, take them down deep, keep them for themselves. That night I camped on the shore, couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. Every little sound, a loon calling, water lapping against the rocks, made me jump. My hands started shaking again, just like after the war. I told myself it was just nerves, just the stress of people being missing. But deep down, I knew something was wrong with Basswood Lake. Something had been wrong for a long time, and we'd just been lucky enough not to notice it before. Around midnight, I heard singing, soft and low, coming from out on the water. Sounded like a woman's voice, sad and lonely. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it across the lake, but the beam just disappeared into the darkness. The singing stopped as soon as the light hit the water. I didn't sleep much that night. The diving team arrived at dawn, 3 men from Duluth with proper gear and a boat full of equipment. I guided them out to where I'd found Walter's boat, but their engine started acting up same as mine had. Died twice before we even got to the deep water. Probably bad gas, said Murphy, the lead diver. Been sitting in the tank too long. But I'd filled that boat myself the day before with fresh fuel. The water was still strange too, warm on top, but when Murphy dipped his hand down 3 feet, he jerked it back fast. Jesus, that's cold, like ice water. They got the diving gear ready while I anchored the boat. The lake was so clear we could see bottom at 30 feet, but past that it just dropped away into black nothing. No fish anywhere, which was wrong. Basswood Lake should have been full of walleye and northern pike. Murphy went down first, following the anchor line. We watched him descend through the clear water until he was just a dark shape against the deeper darkness. He was down maybe 5 minutes when his safety line started jerking hard. "Pull him up," I yelled. They hauled on the rope, but Murphy wasn't on the end of it anymore. Just his weight belt and one flipper, torn like something had ripped it right off his foot. We waited, calling his name, scanning the water. Nothing. Then, about 50 yards away, Murphy's head broke the surface. He was screaming, trying to swim toward us with just one flipper, moving slow and panicked. "Something down there," he gasped when we pulled him into the boat. "Big as a house. Had eyes like headlights." Murphy was tough. 20 years of diving, seen everything the Great Lakes had to offer. But his hands were shaking so bad he couldn't even hold a cup of coffee. "What did it look like?" I asked. "Like a person, but wrong. Too long, too big. And it was moving, toward me, fast. I cut my belt and swam up quick as I could." He looked back at the water, which had gone mirror smooth again. "It's still down there. I can feel it watching us." That's when we found Walter. He was floating face down near the south shore, about a quarter mile from where we'd found his boat. At first I thought he'd drowned and somehow drifted over there. But when we pulled him into the boat, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Walter's lungs were full of water, lake water, but his clothes were completely dry. "That's impossible," said Murphy, still shaking from his dive. "You can't drown without getting wet." But Walter was stone dead, and the water that came out of his mouth when we turned him over was clear and cold as ice. Lake water, no doubt about it. Just like he'd been breathing it instead of air. I'd seen some strange things in Korea, things that didn't make sense when the shells were falling and men were dying all around you. But this was different. This was impossible in a way that made my war memories seem normal. We radioed for the coroner and headed back to shore. Peter Kingbird was waiting for us again, took one look at Walter's body and nodded like he'd been expecting it. "Lake sleepers got him," he said quietly. "They can make a man drown from miles away, fill his lungs with their water. My grandfather saw it happen to a fur trapper back in 1890. "That's crazy talk," said Murphy, but his voice didn't have much conviction. "Is it?" Peter asked. "Then how'd Walter drown without getting wet? How'd he end up a quarter mile from his boat? And what made those claw marks?" Nobody had a good answer for that. The coroner took Walter's body back to town, and the diving team packed up their gear. They wouldn't go back in the water, not after what Murphy had seen down there. Can't say I blamed them. That left just me and Peter to search for, or Harvey and Dorothy Miller. "They're still out there somewhere," I told Peter as we watched the dive boat disappear toward town. "Those folks have grandchildren. They deserve to be found." Peter was quiet for a long time, staring out at the deep water. Finally he said, "Lake sleepers don't usually kill women. Might be the old lady's still alive, but if she is, she won't be for long, and going after her means going into their territory. I can't just leave her. Then we better move fast before they decide she's a threat too." We took my canoe out that evening when the sun was getting low and the water turned dark gold. Peter had brought some kind of herbs that he sprinkled on the water, muttering words in Ojibwe that I didn't understand. Protection, he explained. Might help, might not. Lake sleepers are old magic, older than anything my people know how to fight. We paddled out toward the deep water, staying quiet, watching for any sign of the Millers. The lake was still as death, not even a ripple disturbing the surface. That's when we saw the whirlpools, 3 of them, spinning slowly in a line across the deepest part of the lake. No wind to cause them, no current, just water turning in perfect circles, each one about 10 feet across. Turn around, Peter whispered. Turn around now. But it was too late. Something big was moving under our canoe, something that made the water bulge up like a submarine was passing underneath. I could feel it through the bottom of the boat, smooth and powerful, longer than our canoe. The thing surfaced about 20 yards away. It looked like a person from a distance, but wrong in every way that mattered. Too tall, too thin, with arms that stretched out like tree branches. Its skin was pale as fish belly, and its eyes glowed with their own light, cold and blue as winter ice. But the worst part was its face. It looked almost man, almost like someone I might have known, but stretched and changed like it was wearing a mask that didn't quite fit. The creature stared at us for maybe 10 seconds that felt like 10 hours. Then it smiled, showing teeth like broken glass, and sank back under the water without making a sound. Paddle, Peter whispered. Paddle fast, but don't splash. We moved as quick and quiet as we could toward shore, but I could feel that thing following us. Every few seconds the water would bulge up somewhere nearby, like it was circling us, playing with us. Just before we reached shallow water, I heard Dorothy Miller's voice calling from somewhere out on the lake. Help me! Please, somebody help me! I almost turned the canoe around. Almost. But Peter grabbed my paddle. That's not her, he said. That's them, trying to get us to come back. Lake sleepers can make any sound they want, copy any voice they've heard. The voice called again, closer this time, full of pain and fear. Teddy, I know you're out there. Please don't leave me. It knew my name. The thing knew my name. But Peter was right. We kept paddling, and the voice followed us all the way to shore, sometimes sounding like Dorothy, sometimes like Walter, sometimes like Harvey Miller begging for his life. When we finally pulled the canoe up on the rocks, the voices stopped. The lake went quiet again, smooth as glass, like nothing had happened at all. But I knew something was still out there, watching us from the deep water. Something that had been sleeping down there for longer than anyone could remember, and now we'd woken it up. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that thing's face, almost human, but wrong enough to make my skin crawl. Peter stayed by the fire, feeding it dry wood and keeping the flames high. Light bothers them, he said. They're used to the deep dark. Fire might keep them away from shore. How do you know all this? Stories. My grandfather, his grandfather, going back 7 generations. They all knew about the lake sleepers. Knew to stay away from the tuz. You deep water when the fish stopped jumping and the birds went quiet. Around 3 a.m, we heard Harvey Miller calling for help. His voice came from different directions. First from the water, then from the woods behind us, then from somewhere up in the trees. But Peter had warned me about the voices, so I just put more wood on the fire and tried not to listen. They're testing us, Peter said, seeing if we'll come looking. Once you go into their territory at night, you don't come back. The voices kept up until dawn, sometimes Harvey, sometimes Dorothy, sometimes Walter. Once I heard my mother calling my name, which was impossible since she'd been dead for 10 years. But the lake sleepers had gotten into my head somehow, found voices that would hurt the most. When the sun came up, we found Harvey Miller. He was sitting on a rock about 50 feet from our camp, back turned to us, perfectly still. At first I thought maybe he'd escaped, found his way to shore during the night. But when we got closer, I saw the water. Harvey was soaking wet, like he'd just climbed out of the lake. But he'd been sitting there for hours. His clothes should have dried in the warm morning air. Instead, Lake water was still dripping from his hair, pooling around the rock. "Harvey?" I called softly. He didn't answer, didn't move at all. I reached out and touched his shoulder. Harvey toppled over backward, stiff as a board. His eyes were wide open, staring at nothing, and when his mouth fell open, lake water poured out. Lots of it. More water than could possibly fit in a man's lungs. It kept coming for almost a minute, clear and cold, like Harvey had become some kind of spring that bubbled up from deep underground. "How long has he been dead?" I asked Peter. "Since yesterday. Lake sleepers kept him walking around, made him look alive until we found him. They want us to know they him to and do things that don't make sense." We wrapped Harvey in a tarp and loaded him into the canoe. I wanted to get him back to town, let the sheriff deal with whatever was happening here, but Peter shook his head. "Leave now, and the old lady dies for sure. Maybe other folks too. Lake sleepers are awake now, angry. They won't go back to sleep until they've settled things." "What do you mean, settled things?" "They think we're invading their territory. Been quiet for 60 years because nobody bothered them much. But now there's been 3 boats in the deep water in 1 week. That's too many. They want us gone. So we leave. Won't work. They know where we live now, know our voices. Lake sleepers can travel through any water, rivers, streams, even wells. They'll follow us home if we run." I looked out at the lake, smooth and innocent in the morning sun. Hard to believe something so beautiful could be so dangerous. "What do they want?" "Same thing they've always wanted, to be left alone. But they'll kill anyone who gets in their way. And right now, that means us." We decided to search the shoreline for Dorothy Miller, staying in shallow water where the lake sleepers couldn't reach us. At least, I hoped they couldn't reach us. Everything Peter told me came from old stories, and I wasn't sure how much to believe. We found her around noon. Dorothy was sitting in the shade of a big pine tree, about 10 yards back from the water's edge. She was alive, which surprised me, talking to herself in a quiet, sing-song voice. "Dorothy?" I called. "Mrs. Miller? We're here to help." She looked up at me with eyes that didn't focus right. Her hair was wet, and her dress was soaked through, but she'd been sitting in that spot for hours. "They showed me things," she said in a voice like a little girl's. "Pretty things. Down where the light doesn't go. They wanted me to stay and see more pretty things." "What kind of things?" "Cities made of bones, gardens that grow in the dark, people who've been sleeping for so long they forgot how to wake up." Dorothy giggled, a sound that made my skin crawl. "They said I could sleep too if I wanted, sleep and dream forever." I knelt down beside her. "We're going to take you home, Mrs. Miller, get you somewhere safe." "Safe?" She looked at me like I'd said something funny. "There's no safe place from them. They can reach anywhere water goes. Every lake, every river, every little stream, even the rain." She held out her hand, palm up, though the sky was clear. "Feel that? It's starting to rain." There was no rain, but Dorothy's hand was collecting water from nowhere, filling up like she was holding it under a faucet. "Peter," I said quietly, "we need to go, now." But when I turned around, Peter was standing waist-deep in the lake, staring down into the water like he was hypnotized. "Peter, get out of there." He didn't answer, just stood there swaying slightly like he was listening to music I couldn't hear. The water around him was starting to move, forming little whirlpools that spun faster and faster. I grabbed Dorothy and half-carried her toward the canoe, but she fought me every step. "Don't you see them?" she whispered. "They're beautiful, so beautiful." I looked back at the lake and saw what she meant. There were dozens of them rising from the deep water, tall, pale figures that moved like dancers, arms swaying in rhythm with currents I couldn't feel. They were singing, the same sound I'd heard the night before, but louder now, coming from all directions. Peter was walking deeper into the lake, water up to his chest now. The lake sleepers were calling to him in voices that sounded like his dead wife, his children, everyone he'd ever loved. "Don't listen," I shouted. But my own voice sounded thin and far away. The singing was getting inside my head, making me remember things I'd tried to forget. My squad in Korea, the men who'd died while I lived, their voices mixed with the lake sleepers' song, calling me to join them in the deep water where nothing hurt anymore. I took a step toward the lake, then another. Dorothy was laughing behind me, clapping her hands like a child at a circus. Yes, yes, go to them. They'll make the bad dreams stop. That's when I remembered something from the war. Sometimes, when the shelling got real bad, you had to make noise to drown out the sound of death coming for you. Had to yell louder than the artillery, sing louder than the screaming. I started shouting at the top of my lungs, army songs, nursery rhymes, anything to break the spell of that singing. The lake sleepers' voices faltered, just for a second. It was enough. Peter stopped walking and looked around like he was waking up from a dream. The water was up to his neck, and something big was moving toward him under the surface. "Peter, swim for shore!" He turned and started swimming, fast as an old man could manage. Behind him, the water erupted in a fountain 30 feet high. Something huge and pale thrashed just under the surface, angry that its prey was getting away. Peter made it to shallow water, but barely. I hauled him up on the rocks, both of us gasping and shaking. "They almost had me," he wheezed. "Got inside my head, made me see Sarah. Been dead 15 years, but she looked young again, the way she did when we first got married." Dorothy Miller was still sitting under her tree, humming along with voices only she could hear. Her dress was getting wetter by the minute, even though there was no water anywhere near her. "We can't stay here," I said. "They're getting stronger." "Or we're getting weaker," Peter replied. "Being around them too long, it changes you. Makes you want things that'll kill you." I looked out at the lake. The pale figures were still there, standing in the deep water, watching us with their glowing eyes, waiting for us to make a mistake. But now there were more of them. A lot more. And the sun was starting to go down. We had maybe 2 hours of daylight left when the lake started to rise. Not all at once, but steady, like so. Mion had opened a giant faucet somewhere upstream. The water crept up the rocky shore inch by inch, reaching for our camp. "That's impossible," I said. "Lakes don't just rise, not without rain or snowmelt." But Peter was already moving, gathering our gear. "Lake sleepers control the water, all of it. They're coming for us." Dorothy Miller giggled from under her tree. "The tide's coming in, just like at the ocean." We were 60 miles from the nearest ocean, but Dorothy was right about one thing. The water kept rising. Our canoe was already floating, bumping against the rocks where we'd pulled it up safe. "We need to get higher," I said, looking at the hills behind us. "Won't matter." Peter pointed to a little stream that fed into the lake. The creek was flowing backward now, carrying lake water up into the woods. "They can make water go anywhere they want, up hills, through solid rock, anywhere." The lake sleepers were moving closer to shore, dozens of them now, gliding through the water like pale ghosts. Their singing had changed too, not trying to hypnotize us anymore, but something harder, more demanding. "What are they saying?" I asked. Peter listened for a moment, his face grim. "They want us to give back what we took." "We didn't take anything. We took Walter, took Harvey, disturbed their territory with boats and divers and noise." Peter looked out at the advancing figures. "In their minds, we're thieves, and they want payment." The water was ankle-deep around our camp now, and getting deeper. I could feel something moving under the surface, not the lake sleepers themselves, but smaller things. Fish, maybe, or snakes. Hard to tell in the murky water. That's when I realized what we had to do. "The bodies," I said. "We give them back the bodies." "Won't work. Dead is dead. Lake sleepers want living payment now." "Then what do they want?" Peter was quiet for a long time, watching the pale figures in the water. Finally he said, "One of us has to go to them, willingly. That's the only way this ends." "That's crazy." "Is it? Look around, Teddy. This whole thing is crazy. We're dealing with something older than human memory, something that plays by rules we don't understand. But they do have rules, always have. The water was knee-deep now, and Dorothy Miller was laughing as it swirled around the tree where she sat. She wasn't fighting it anymore, just letting it carry her along like she was in a gentle river. "Dorothy's already chosen," Peter said quietly. "Look at her. She's been changing since we found her. Pretty soon she won't be human anymore." He was right. Dorothy's skin had gone pale as fish belly, and when she smiled, her teeth looked sharp. She was humming along with the lake sleeper's song, and the water around her was starting to glow with the same cold light as their eyes. "We can still save her." "No, we can't. But we can make sure she's the only one they take." Peter started walking toward the water, but I grabbed his arm. "What are you doing?" "What needs to be done. I'm old, Teddy. Been living on borrowed time since my heart attack 3 years ago. You're young. Got a whole life ahead of you. I'm not letting you sacrifice yourself." "Then you got a better idea?" "I did, actually. A crazy idea, but it might work. In Korea, we'd learned that sometimes the best defense was a good offense. When the enemy had you surrounded and outnumbered, you didn't sit there waiting to die. You hit them hard and fast, made them think twice about messing with you. The lake sleepers controlled water, but they weren't water themselves. They had bodies, physical forms that could be hurt. Murphy had seen one up close, and it was big, but not invincible." "Can they be killed?" I asked Peter. "Maybe, but not with guns or knives. They're too old, too strong. You'd need something that could hurt the water itself." I thought about that. What could hurt water? Then I remembered the demolition training I'd had in the Army. Underwater explosives, designed to blow up bridges and docks. I didn't have any military-grade charges, but I had something almost as good. "My plane," I said. "Still got aviation fuel in the tanks. And there's road flares in the emergency kit." "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking these things have been sleeping down there for centuries, never had to deal with modern weapons. Maybe it's time someone taught them about the 20th century." The water was waist-deep now, and the lake sleepers were close enough that I could see their faces clearly. Each one looked almost human, but wrong in subtle ways. Eyes too big, mouths too wide, fingers too long. Like someone had tried to make people out of clay and gotten the proportions slightly off. Dorothy Miller was floating now, arms spread wide, laughing as the glowing water carried her toward the deep lake. She wasn't struggling anymore, wasn't even trying to stay human. "Do it fast," Peter said. "Once they take her all the way under, there's no coming back." I waded through the rising water toward my plane, fighting the current that tried to push me back toward shore. The lake sleepers watched me but didn't interfere. Maybe they were curious what I was planning, or maybe they just enjoyed watching us struggle. The Piper was floating free now, pontoons riding high on the Unnatural flood. I climbed into the cockpit and grabbed the emergency flares from under the seat, 3 of them, each one hot enough to burn underwater. Then I opened the fuel valve and let aviation gas start pouring into the lake. The lake sleepers figured out what I was doing just as I lit the first flare. They came for me fast, rising up out of the deep water like pale nightmares. The closest one reached out with arms that stretched impossibly long, trying to grab me before I could throw the flare. I tossed it into the spreading fuel slick and doves, sideways off the plane. The explosion lit up the whole lake like a miniature sun. Burning fuel spread across the surface in a perfect circle, and the lake sleepers caught in it started screaming, not with their voices, but with a sound like breaking glass that came from the water itself. One of them was on fire, actual fire, burning like a torch even though it was mostly underwater. It thrashed and writhed, and every movement sent waves of pain through the lake itself. The others retreated toward deep water, but I wasn't done. I lit the second flare and threw it as far as I could toward the center of the lake. More burning fuel, more screaming. The water around the explosion turned black, like the lake was bleeding. The third flare I saved, treading water and watching the lake sleepers regroup. They were angry now, really angry. The water started churning like a pot coming to boil, and I could feel something huge moving underneath. Then the biggest one surfaced, It was the size of a city bus, pale and terrible, with eyes like headlights and a mouthful of teeth like broken bottles. This was the old one, the first one, the thing that had been sleeping at the bottom of Basswood Lake since before humans learned to make fire. It looked at me with ancient hatred, and the water around it began to glow brighter and brighter. I lit the last flare and held it up like a torch. "You want me?" I shouted. "Come and get me." The thing rushed toward me, mouth opening wide enough to swallow a boat, but I'd been waiting for it to get close. I shoved the flare right down its throat and dove deep as I could. The explosion from inside lit up the entire lake bottom. I saw bones down there, thousands of them, scattered across the deep places where the lake sleepers had been feeding for centuries. Saw the ruins of canoes and boats, the remains of everyone who'd ever disappeared in these waters. When I surfaced, the big lake sleeper was gone, just pieces floating in the burning water, dissolving like salt. The others were retreating, sinking back into the deepest parts of the lake. The unnatural flood was already receding, water levels dropping back to normal. But Dorothy Miller was still out there, floating in the deep water with her eyes closed and that strange smile on her face. I swam toward her as fast as I could, but she was already changing. Her skin had gone translucent, and I could see dark water flowing through her veins instead of blood. "Dorothy," I called, "come back." She opened her eyes and looked at me. For just a second, she was human again, scared and confused and wanting to go home. "Tell my grandchildren I love them," she whispered. Then she sank beneath the surface and was gone. I pulled Peter and myself to shore as the lake settled back to normal. The burning fuel had mostly burned itself out, leaving just a few scattered flames dancing on the surface like fireflies. We found Dorothy Miller's body 3 days later, washed up on a rocky beach 20 miles downstream. The coroner said she'd drowned, but her lungs were full of lake water so cold it should have been ice. And when they examined her blood, they found microscopic organisms that didn't match anything in the biological record books. The official report blamed the whole thing on a boating accident. Walter's boat had capsized in a sudden squall, and the 3 victims had drowned before help could arrive. Case closed, filed away, forgotten by everyone except me and Peter. But I know the truth. The lake sleepers are still down there, sleeping in the deepest parts of Basswood Lake. Fewer of them now, and more careful about showing themselves, but still there, still waiting. I can feel them sometimes when I fly over the water. My compass still spins near the deep spots, and my engine still coughs when I get too close to where their cities lie hidden on the lake bottom. The fishing's been better since that summer. Seems like the regular fish moved back in on. The lake sleepers went dormant again. Tourists come through all the time now, never knowing how close they are to something that could pull them down to the deep places. I've become the unofficial guardian of Basswood Lake. Every few months I fly patrol, checking for signs that the sleepers are stirring, looking for water temperatures that don't make sense, or whirlpools with no wind to cause them. Peter died 2 winters ago. Heart attack, like he always said would get him. Before he passed, he taught me some of the old stories, the protective rituals his grandfather had passed down. I scatter tobacco on the water during the full moon, speak words in Ojibwe that I don't fully understand, but hope will keep the old agreements intact. Sometimes, late at night when the lake is perfectly still, I hear them singing, soft and low, like a lullaby that echoes up from the deepest trenches. It's not the hunting song they used that summer. This one is sadder, lonelier, like they're mourning something lost. Maybe they're mourning the big one I killed, or maybe they're just singing about the long loneliness of being the last of their kind. Either way, I listen and remember and make sure nobody else goes swimming in the deep water after dark. The boundary waters are full of old secrets, things that have been sleeping since before the first people paddled these waters in birch bark canoes. Most of them want to be left alone, and I'm happy to oblige them. But every now and then, when the moon is dark and the water is still as glass, I see pale shapes moving in the deepest parts of Basswood Lake. The lake sleepers, dreaming their ancient dreams, waiting for the day when the world forgets to be afraid of deep water. I'll keep watching until that day comes, and I'll make sure it never does.